Hello, I'm Dylan.
And I'm Keon.
And I'm John.
And this is Zenith, that podcast where we keep a life-draining bug in the basement because this week we watched Rescue.
Written by Chris Boucher.
Directed by Mary Ridge.
And aired on September 28th, 1981.
And if you are paying attention during the intro, you'll be either glad or greatly distressed to hear that we're joined again by John of Making Blake 7. No, I'm just pulling your leg. But yeah, so John's back. Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be back. And I should tell your listeners that in the interest of authenticity, the guys have actually kept me in the basement for the last week or two. So if I sound a bit strange, that's possibly why. But I think it can only enhance the episode, I think.
Yeah, we built a basement specifically for this because if you didn't know, it's actually against building code to have basements in most buildings in California because of the San Andreas fault, because we're at high risk for earthquakes.
But we installed one anyway.
Yeah, we
spiral
installed
staircase
anyway.
and all, exact replica of the set from the episode. No.
Just to keep John in the basement. We spared no expense on this episode.
It's quite comfortable. I like it down there.
Well, that's good because you'll be going back down there as soon as you're done here. So.
Great. Of course, yes. Sorry, sir.
So,
Oh, God.
How do we want to start this? Do we want to start this with the obvious? Do you want to talk about what's going on with your Twitter feed, or do we want to save that till later in the episode, or do we want to get that out of the way now? Because I feel like if anybody's coming here from your Twitter feed, they're going to be greatly interested to hear. Probably you're just going to say what you already said on Twitter again, just in audio form now. But for some people, that gives it more credibility, I guess.
I'll keep it brief. So I run the Making Blake 7 Twitter account. It's been going for a year and a half or 2 years. Currently midway through Series 2, or Series B, as I call it. I don't think anyone else does, but I do. And I'm basically just pausing it for a while. I'm taking a year, maybe two off, but I do plan to pick it up again. But yeah, I just need a bit of... it's just taking up a lot of my free time, and my job's quite full on at the moment. So I've decided to take a step back for a while and take a break from it. But there's still a couple of weeks to go, and I'm quite excited, actually. There's the Cygnus Alpha Convention next weekend, or possibly this weekend when people are listening to this. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually a guest at that rather than... I don't really do conventions, but the chap who's organising it asked me to come and do a presentation there, so I'm very excited about that. It's quite a nice way to kind of tie things up, really. It actually coincides, and it is just a coincidence with the last tweet. So I'll actually be at this amazing 40th anniversary convention. So hopefully meeting Gisette Simon and Sally Nivette and Jan Chappell and Michael Keating. Basically all the surviving main cast members are there, and some really interesting behind the scenes people are there too, and the guys from Big Finish. So that's going to be a really, really exciting event. I'm really looking forward to that. I feel like I'm hyping it, but all the tickets are sold out, so I don't know. I'm trying to sell it.
You're hyping it up, and all the listeners are going to be like, oh, where's the convention? Oh, damn, sold out. Most conventions sell out within like the first 2 weeks, but that sounds really exciting, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even... I think I'm sort of like you. I'm not a big convention person either, but, with... As far as Blake 7 goes, it sounds very cool. Like, I just like... And I've been thinking about this recently, too. I just like how the Blake 7... sort of fandom, I guess, well, I don't even like that word, is still around. There's still content being produced for it. People are still interested in the show. And that's really awesome to me, considering it's sort of a short series, 52 episodes.
52 episodes is quite a bit. That's halfway to syndication in America.
But
yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It's got one of the most dedicated followings. It's not one of the biggest, and I think new fans are coming along all the time. I think there is a feeling that perhaps it might be dwindling slightly, because obviously none of us are getting any younger. Unfortunately, we've lost some cast members recently. Obviously, Jacqueline Pierce passed away very recently, which was very sad. So I think it is changing slightly, but Big Finish is still producing stuff, and I think there is still a bit of life left in it. But yeah, it's one of those few brands that hasn't been revived or reimagined or relaunched. I don't know if that will. Obviously, that would reignite interest, but I don't know if that's ever likely to happen, just because the rights issues are just so complicated, I think.
Well, I mean, when we were starting this podcast and I was looking up things about Blake 7, all I could find was reboot coming soon from Sci-Fi, which is an American science fiction channel, except it's spelled S-Y-F-Y.
Yep.
Sci-Fi. But then, like, all the articles are like, yeah, Sci-Fi's going to be making a reboot, should come out next year. And then the next article is like, well, they've run into some rights issues. They don't know if it's happening. Or, like, some of them are like, well, we don't know who we're going to cast.
A couple of years ago, I think, if I remember
I think that was
correctly.
2013, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that was the most recent, I think. But it's been going on forever. You know, Paul Darrow for many years was, you know, when Terry Nation was still alive, they were trying to get a mini-series off the ground. So I always take it with a pinch of salt. I've never really believed it would happen. But I said the same about Doctor Who, and that eventually came back. So you never know.
They could do what Bob Baker and David Martin are doing and just K9 cinematic universe. Here we go.
Yeah.
Did that Omega movie ever come out? K9 versus
it's coming.
Omega.
And at a recent convention, they announced they've basically got like a whole actual cinematic universe planned with Bob Baker and David Martin characters. Because they're like, we've got this whole thing going, and we've got all these ideas, and we've got all these studios have bought the rights, and it's going to be great. And we're making a whole new TV series too. And I'm like, what?
Maybe they can bring back Drax from the Armageddon Factor.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I vaguely aware of all that. I'm just kind of, I think all they've got is a press release, really, isn't it? It's like, who's going to be in this? Who wants to see it? And I didn't see any of that. There was a K9 TV show, wasn't there? But I've not seen any of it. I've seen maybe a few seconds of it online, but it didn't look great.
And then I don't remember who wrote the episodes with Syl, but he was like, we're going to make a Syl movie too. And I'm like, what? So, yeah, that's the current state of that. We can thank the BBC for that rights snafu that's giving us all of that. Just brilliant content over there.
Well, no one's forcing anyone to actually make anything with these characters and properties. So
no, but that's it. Nobody wants it either. You know, just don't do it. Yeah, how about that? There's an idea. Don't bother. That's terrible. I shouldn't say. I like K9, but no interest in watching a whole series about him.
Yeah, I've never really considered K9 a really strong contender for main character of the year.
No.
It's the quote from Jurassic Park. You were too preoccupied with whether or not you'd never stop to think if you should.
Yeah, that applies to a lot of things, doesn't it?
Yeah, well. Anyway, back to Blake 7, I guess. Last week we mentioned that there was nearly a year between... nearly 2 years, between Series C and D.
About a year and a half.
C ended in April, I think. Was it April or May? And then Series D comes back in September.
Of 81.
Actually pretty close to when this episode's going to go out. So somehow between starting on the 40th anniversary date, we're going to end actually pretty close to on the day that the show ended. Just by sheer coincidence, mostly. Yeah, well, it's a 52 episode series, isn't it? So it's it's quite synchronizes quite nicely with your podcast. Almost like you planned it that way. Almost. I think Terminal was shown on the 31st of March, 1980, and I'm sure, as you know, that was supposed to be the last episode, and it was only because the controller, BBC One or whoever, was watching it and said, "No, that was so good, let's bring it back." And by that stage, it would have been too late for them to go into production the time that they would normally have done with Blake 7, so they basically had to wait before they could begin production and get everything geared up. So that's why there was such a massive gap between seasons. Well, I think as we get more into the season, the discussion is going to shift to was the gap actually worth it? I mean, for this episode, I think we would probably all agree, since I think we all really like this episode, that it came out pretty good. I don't know if the rest of the season's going to hold up. This is a divisive season, according to what I've heard. Oh, yeah, it is. I mean, Series D is very, very different to what came before. I mean, it is essentially a different series. I mean, Chris Boucher always said he always thought it was a shame that they didn't do a fifth series, because Series 4 was basically starting a new series, and he felt that it was only towards the end that they really knew where they were going with the format. But it definitely feels
different. I mean, obviously you've got the Liberator's gone, so it just feels and looks different, but it's much more than that. And the series is now firmly in the 80s as well. God, that makes it sound so old. But it was, I mean, I know Series C was shown in 1980, but most of it was made in 1979. But 1981, it just has a different feel about it. I mean, if you look at how Doctor Who changed and a couple of the other BBC series around that time, there is definitely and John Nathan Turner came with that quote, didn't he? He wanted to take Doctor Who into the 80s, and I think it was the same with Blake Seven, going, yeah, it's the 80s now. And it just, the way the series was made and just the way it looks. So my advice moving forward would be just bear in mind that don't expect it to be just like it was before. It is, if you accept it on its own terms. I mean, it's my favorite season. I just love it, but it is crazy. And it's a game of two halves as well. You can tell in the first half that they were really, the series was made so quickly and they were really kind of struggling to get everything together. But the second half of the series is just solid. It's just I think the best episodes they ever made. And I've got a real fondness for the first half as well. Mm-hmm. But I do quite like the look and feel, and from a production standpoint, it's really interesting. But certainly by the end, it's just one classic episode after another.
You mentioned Doctor Who, and yeah, right about this time is actually when JNT took over. When this episode airs, season 18's finished up, which was JNT's first season. When this airs, I guess, launching production on season 19.
It's the beginning of the end, basically.
I would say the beginning of the end was really more like season 2021. I think season 19 was still going pretty strong, except for the Merca. And yeah, this episode, just the title sequence feels very 80s already.
Shall we talk about the title sequence? What do you think of it?
It's the only thing I disliked from the episode.
Thoughts about the title sequence.
It's the only thing I disliked from this episode. And that might just be, that it's a big change. I don't know. I might warm up to it a little bit.
I feel like it's too static. The other two title sequences were very dynamic with lots of cuts and Liberator zooming through space and Blake's face and security camera and the Liberator followed by chase ships. So this one is very, very static. It feels like it's just Scorpio point of view vision for most of it, and then we get that really questionable decision to redesign the Blake 7 logo at the very end of the title sequence.
Right.
I like it. The thing is, I've got such nostalgic feelings about. I don't think I can just judge it, dispassionately. I just love everything about it. But it is. I think it's quite interesting that you can always see something different every time you watch it. All the different displays on the screen, but yeah, it isn't as well loved as perhaps certainly the original one. But the guy who did it, Doug Bird, he did the one for Series C. But I've got a sad story for you guys now. He actually died. He basically storyboarded it, but then he died before the title sequence was actually made. He was only 29 years old. I'm going to make you feel guilty now because you've just been criticizing his work.
I really liked the Series C title sequence. So
well, there you go. Yeah. But he did some amazing work. I mean, he won a BAFTA award. He did the title sequence for I don't know, you might not have heard of it, but Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It was I've
heard of the book.
Yeah, and it was made into a film a couple of years ago, I think, and it was a very prestigious BBC drama production, and he did the title sequence for that and won a BAFTA award for it, and then he did the Series C titles. And then in 1981 alone, bearing in mind he's only 29, he designed the title sequences for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Day of the Triffids, the BBC version of that, obviously Series D of Blake 7, a program called When the Boat Comes In, which was quite another big production, and also a soap opera, a new BBC soap opera called Triangle, which was terrible, but it was still quite a high-profile show. But it's now recognised as being really bad. But that was just in 1 year alone. He did all those title sequences. So I think his career, and he was nominated for another BAFTA for Hitchhiker's Guide. So it's really sad. He died in an airplane or something, like a miniature experimental airplane. So like quite a bizarre way to go. but yeah, so that's a nice cheerful story.
Yeah, nice cheerful start.
Yeah, where do we go from there? Yeah. So that was that. Yeah, but I like it. I think it might grow on you as you watch it in the coming weeks and months.
Right.
Possibly. I mean, you were talking about this feeling very 80s, and that redesigned logo is basically the epitome of 80s design. You look at the old one, and it feels very 70s because it's like big letters and very swoopy and angled, and then perspective-wise, and then you get to this one, which is very head-on, angles, techno vibe, just a single font with like a red gradient inside. Like, it's very 80s compared to the previous logo, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, it is. Oh, it's very, very 1981, isn't it? Yeah.
And then, Rescue by Chris Boucher appears on the screen, and then the episode starts with Avon and Dana.
They get right into the action. This starts right where, almost right where
Terminal
right where it
left off. It feels like it's been a couple hours at least.
Yeah, but compare that to the couple of possibly years or months between B and C, you know?
Yeah, I'm always intrigued by just how long has passed, were they, in that underground base for a couple of weeks, a couple of days? I mean, I imagine, I get the sense it is just a couple of hours, but I'm just wondering if Big Finish could ever justify setting
I'm sure they have
adventures in that gap. But it is intriguing because if you think about it, the situation they were left in at the end of Terminal, Avon's basically just shafted them. It's entirely his fault that they're in this predicament, and yet no one really seems that angry with him. So maybe they all just kind of had a beer in that base and chatted it through.
There's no time to be angry. Be angry later.
That's true.
I noticed that Terminal seems to somehow have rounded itself off since last week. Last week in Terminal, it was an ellipsoid, and then this week it's a sphere. I was a little questioning of that.
We wondered whether Zen was distorting the image intentionally, but no, whatever.
It's basically, obviously, it's just a continuity mistake, isn't it? But I think it's a real shame because I think they've really tried quite hard to match the continuity. They even got the same director back, Mary Ridge, and they're all most of them are wearing the costumes from Terminal. So I think the space binoculars that Avon's using. So it's just a shame that they didn't use the right shot of Terminal. But it could be argued that you're seeing it from
above,
not from front on. It could be like from the side, if that makes sense. So
no, I know what you're saying. Like, it looks like an ellipse from the side, and then from above it looks like a circle. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, it's a stretch, and that's not what was intended, obviously. But but they've still got the heartbeat pulsing in the background, which is great. I think that's just such a simple but effective.
I think part of the reason why it's not ellipsoidal is because it looks like they reused the exact same planet for Xenon, but then they just like put it under different colored studio lights. Like, they used cyan for Terminal to try and match the image of Terminal from last season, then they used like red for Xenon. I think it was red for Xenon.
It looks kind of like a greenish color, isn't it? Yeah,
because it looks almost like the exact same like planet prop, I guess it would be.
I think it is. I think throughout this, I don't know if it class it as a spoiler, but I think they do tend to just use the same prop, sadly. And did you notice?
I assume you say sadly because the prop starts to disintegrate halfway through the season, but
no, it's not as because in previous seasons each planet looked very distinctive. Mm-hmm. Here it does tend to be just a blue circle. Did you notice that when the spaceship blew up, did you recognize that sequence from anywhere?
I didn't. I did recognize reused footage from Volcano later in this episode.
I noticed that too. But the ship that Sevlon leaves, then when it explodes, that's actually Koza's ship from Weapon.
Huh.
Oh, okay.
Just spliced in. I mean, I think it works brilliantly. It fits. So why not? But it was a good effect. But that's where that was from.
Right. And since you mentioned Weapon, back when we watched Weapon, we were like, oh, that's stock footage, that explosion. But then later on, I found out that it actually wasn't. Right. It was actually done for the episode.
That's right. Yeah. And they actually filmed it on location. They filmed the effect outside, which I think maybe helped make it look so good.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And I was surprised at how sort of good it all looked. But yeah, I didn't catch it here.
Yeah, we've got the snake as well. What did you think of the snake? So it starts with Avon and Dana watching this ship. It blows up. And then she wants to rush back to the base because Avon has theorized that if Servalan's booby-trapped the ship, she'll have booby-trapped the base. So that's kind of blown up as well. And Dana naturally just wants to go back and try and help everyone. But Avon's saying, take it slowly, Dana. And then she runs into that big snake thing. I don't even know if it's meant to be a snake, but that big kind of root or snake or whatever.
I imagine it's just some sort of like sentient plant. I just want to mention when she runs off, she's like, I'll see you at the base, Avon. And after she leaves earshot, Avon just kind of goes, no, you won't. Yeah, just like under his breath. And I was like, what?
I doubt it.
No, I thought this thing was sort of, I imagined it as like a brontosaur type thing, and you're just seeing its neck.
A brontosaurus?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird, I mean, I think it's a great prop. It looks partly like a creature, but it does look quite plant-like as well. It's kind of weird to work out what it is. You don't see it for long. It's only on screen for like a second, isn't it? And then it
gets a little bit more screen time in a little bit when they regroup, and then Dana and Villa fall down that.
Dana is so useless in this episode, isn't she? I love Gisette Simon. She gives a good performance, but she's an absolute liability in this episode. You just, she runs into that snake and has to get rescued. It's her fault that her and Villa end up down that hole, but she blames Villa for it. And then she goes into the basement and starts crying like a 5-year-old, and just like, for God's sake, when you think how strong she was just at the very start of Series C, it's a shame that she's not very well catered for here.
Yeah, she really is pretty useless in the story. She does get a little bit of a moment when they Scorpio a little bit later when she's talking about the weapons and how she worked on a weapon system like that for years, but she never got it to work, and that's about her only good moment. She becomes a liability again later on when she drags Tarrant down into the basement.
Yeah, exactly. She just the gun as well. When you just talked there about all the different types of bullets and what have you, are you looking forward to seeing those being used throughout the rest of the series?
No, because I'm looking forward to them completely throwing that out the window and just using like regular bullets for the next 12 episodes.
You know this series so well.
I guess I don't, because I was kind of looking forward to it.
Wow.
I mean, I'm looking forward, and I guess my hopes and dreams will just be crushed here and now. But I'm looking forward to a lot of, of the tech on Scorpio.
Yeah, that's definitely not happening.
Well, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, but yeah, so manage your expectations. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, you probably are better equipped to answer this question than Keon would be, but do you know if the budget was dropped for Series D compared to A, B, and C?
It certainly didn't go up, and there was a real problem at the time with inflation. So I think you got a lot less for your budget. So I know they spent a lot less on costumes, for instance. The budget went right down there because they basically keep the same costumes for multiple episodes. So yeah, I think it was tighter. The money didn't go as far as it did before. And whereas previous years, the budget had gone up, not hugely, but slightly each year. That wasn't the case here. And the money just didn't go as far as it would have done before. So it was definitely like all the other seasons, it was, very, very tight budget, more so perhaps than before.
Okay. Yeah, because I was curious about that, especially with the title sequence being so static. I mean, also there not being a ton of great sets in the story. Spoiler alert, I really find the Scorpio Bridge to be really underwhelming.
I really like it. I like it.
Really kind of hate it.
I think it's as good as The Liberator.
Guys, before we get onto Scorpio, we've got something we haven't talked about.
Yeah, we're going to talk about
traumatic thing from my childhood.
Okay, well, so Villa saves Tarrant first, and then he hears...
Right, we get sort of a shot of him dragging Tarrant out.
Yeah. And then...
I think Tarrant must have been at least partly conscious, because there's no way Villa could have carried him all the way up that massive long ladder that we saw. So presumably he was semi-conscious.
Right.
Well, then Villa hears what turns out to be Callie's last words, Villa.
Now, it's interesting because originally they thought Jan Chappell was going to come back and do the whole of the 4th series. And then it seemed like she was only going to be in the first 6 episodes. So they went ahead, and I think the plan was to just write her out after episode 6. But they just thought she's definitely coming back. Everyone else had agreed to. And then I think they negotiated with Jan Chappell, and they were under the impression she was coming back. So all the scripts were written, well, the first 6, and certainly Rescue was written, and Callie was in it all the way through. And then Jan Chappell said, no, I'm not. I don't want to come back. And so they said, but you're coming back for 6 episodes, aren't you? They said, no. And they said, well, okay, will you come back for 5? And then she was like, no. Will you come back for 4? And she was like, no. And then this kept going backwards and forwards. And they said, well, will you come back for 2 episodes? And she's like, no, I'm not doing it. And then 1? Will you do 1 episode? She said, no, I don't want to do it. And then said, well, would you at least maybe do a couple of days filming so we can write you out? And she said, nope. And then he said, well, would you do some dialogue off screen? And then they were like, she's like, nope, don't even want to do that. And then eventually they said, well, will you do, she said, I'll do 2 words. She wouldn't even do, I think the original plan was Chris Boucher was going to at least have her, talking to Villa telepathically saying, get away, don't mind me or whatever, but I'm sure it wouldn't have been that. It would have been better. But she would only do those 2 words. I think she just had enough. She was just like, I need to move on. If she was seen to be in it, then people might make the assumption that she's still part of the series. So I actually think they did. I think that Callie is killed off brilliantly, because what else could they do? At least, even though it's only 2 words, it was Jan Chappell. She did go to the recording studio and record those 2 lines. It does give you the feeling that she was there, and it's very grim as well. I love the fact that they're already in a terrible situation at the end of Terminal. It just gets so much worse within the opening 2 minutes, and I think if you think about it, it's just so dark what happens to her. She always used to say, may you die alone and silent, and that's kind of what she does. At the bottom of this dark shaft, and it's pretty dark and horrible. But I think it's all they could have done. And did you notice that she shouted Blake when she died as well? What do you think that's all about?
So that's what she was saying. Really, just sounded like
I
when she died.
I didn't notice that she said Blake.
No, she cries out Blake's name, and there's been all kinds of theories about why that might be.
Blake. That's what I would do. Kind of like Shatner. Con.
But that's kind of intriguing, isn't it? Is she shouting out because she blames him, or because he was the most important person to her? Or it is quite intriguing why you'd think she might shout out Avon's name, but it's interesting that it's Blake.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, you would think it would be Avon.
And I'm curious to see, because Blake sort of almost haunted Series C in a way, and I'm curious to see if that's. I mean, I know what's coming at the end of this,
right? The final episode, Blake.
But I'm curious to find out how this all plays out.
Well, it's interesting because Blake, as far as they're all concerned, Blake is dead. So I
think they're all just going to buy into Serverland's Blake is dead thing.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to spoil it for you, but yeah, essentially, there's no reason to believe she was lying. So he is mentioned occasionally, but the assumption is that they all believe he is still dead. So,
but maybe Callie's crying out because she knows he's not. Maybe she can sense his telepathic presence somewhere in the universe. Well,
I like to think that somewhere in the universe, Blake heard her.
Sipping a Mai Tai on a beach somewhere.
Yeah. Or maybe he just woke up thinking, was that a nightmare? Or was it actually, maybe he heard her final telepathic scream? But that's just me being very sad.
What if the show ended in the final episode, Blake wakes up and Series C and D were just a fever dream he had, like on the medical ship at the end of Series B?
I think some people quite like that. Not me. I think the series got better as it went along. But yeah. But did you guys know that Callie was going to bite the dust in this, or was that quite a big shock to you watching it this time?
I knew she was biting the dust eventually, because I knew she didn't make it all the way to Blake, but I didn't know when. And then I wrote in my notes here, did they just kill Callie off?
Yeah, I knew she was going to die this series. Didn't know it was going to be in the first 5 minutes of this episode, though.
Well, how do you think it was handled? Do you think it, under the circumstances, bearing in mind they did try to bring her back, do you think it was okay? Or
I mean, you talk about, the struggle to even get her in the recording booth, and you'd think that, if she was there, she would have done a little bit more, right? Than the two, she's already there, do a few more lines. But no, I think it was done devastatingly, and it was good. I liked it.
I liked it right up until about 3 minutes later, when they all kind of just brush it off and walk away. Like, even worse than Gan. Like, at least Gan at the end of the episode, they're like, "Well, Gan's dead. Let's get out of here." Callie gets mentioned once more in this episode, and that's by Avon when he just kind of coldly says she died later on, because he's like, "Oh yeah."
That's quite nice because he quotes that saying of hers that was, "He who trusts can never be betrayed, only mistaken," or something like that. And he says that was a saying among Callie's people. Yeah.
But then he kind of, but the way I interpreted that was that he undermines it by saying they all died, and then he says she died as well. It's kind of like he was saying that to undermine the quote, to say that Callie was wrong.
A little bit, yeah. And she ended up dead. But it shows that he's still thinking of her, I guess. And that was actually a line that was used in Mission to Destiny. So Chris Boucher had remembered that and used it. So it was a scene between Avon and Callie, and it's a very specific callback. So he's basically saying Callie said you should trust people, but that was a saying amongst the people, and they're all dead, and she's dead. And look how that worked out. So he is kind of having a go, but at the same time, it does at least show, I think, that he's thinking of her.
Right,
and there's a great...
Yeah, go on. Sorry, no, sorry.
And there's a great moment as well. I mean, you're right. They don't dwell on it at all. They move on ridiculously quickly. But if you think about it, they're trapped on this planet. As far as they know, they might all be dead in a few hours too. So they can't really do much.
I mean, but I would have expected like something from Villa, at least. Villa and Avon with Callie for, I mean, we don't know how long at this point, but at least a couple of years, because Servalan, I think, mentions that she and Blake have been squaring off for a year or two at some point.
It's been a couple of years. It's been a couple of years.
Villa and Callie and Avon have been together for a couple of years, and at least we get that line from Avon. But Villa, like in this episode, is like, "Oh, Callie's dead. I'm gonna go get drunk now."
Yeah, I think it would have been nice. Although you do, again, I'm doing what I did last time. It is referenced again. Villa. It does have a bigger impact on Villa than is perhaps apparent in this episode. Yeah, that is a bit galling. And there was a line in the original script, where Villa's just saying, the Liberators destroyed, Callie's dead, what's the point of going on? So it's unfortunate that line was dropped. But there's a great moment when Tarrant says, "Where is Callie?" And then Avon says, "She's dead." And then Tarrant says, "Are you sure?" And there's only a tiny little pause before Paul Dara says, "Yes, I'm sure." But that's a great pause. It shows that it has affected him. He went down there, presumably he found her body or what was left of it. And so, it is there. The actors, even though there's not much in the script, they do try and at least imply that Avon is affected by this as much as he can be affected by anything.
Right.
If you think about it, they've all lost people recently. He lost Anna, lost her father. And you think about how Del reacted when his brother died very recently. I mean, he was shaken by it, but I guess you could just say they've all lost so many people that maybe they're just used to it by now. But it is, I'm making excuses for them. For years, it bothered me that just no one really seemed to give a damn that she's gone. But in hindsight, I actually think that's probably more realistic, just because of the situation they were in. And there's enough, we don't see from her dying and then seeing them around the fire, presumably, that some time has passed, so we don't see their initial shock when Villa tells them that she was down there. So, yeah, there is enough leeway, I think, to suggest that they did perhaps care at least a little bit.
Yeah, that was actually my interpretation as well. There's so little that we get, but what's there is so, I don't know, packed with things to unpack, I guess. The stuff you mentioned, right? Avon quoting Callie from Mission to Destiny and the "she's dead" moment, and that's just so devastating to all of them.
But the thing about the "she's dead" moment is that, again, they immediately undermine it, because then Tarrant goes, "What, you went in because you wanted to be a hero too?" And he's like, "No, I needed Aurak." It's not like he went in to go find Callie, because he just brushes it off. I went in to get Aurak.
That's Avon. Yeah, that's Avon doing his thing.
But like Avon and Callie, they built up this thing last season. There was like that implied kind of deeper friendship between them in, what was it? We did it with RG, and I'm forgetting the name now.
Yeah, I forget what that one's called.
And the one where...
Sarcophagus?
Yeah, Sarcophagus.
Yep. There's like an implied deeper friendship, and Avon just brushes this off like, no. I went to go get Aurak. And it's like, you could try and twist it to say like, oh, he's just trying to hide his emotions. But
that's totally what it is.
The way Paul Dara delivers it is just so cold and unfeeling. Like, there's no like actual... It doesn't feel like there's any emotion behind it.
I'm in a complete opposite camp. I say there's no way you could say he's not devastated by this, really.
Yeah, the way he says, "Yes, I'm sure," and he went down. He definitely went down there for her, and he must have found the body, because there's no. Well, he did. I think there's all kinds of fan fiction online, about him finding her and she was still alive and she died in his arms and all that nonsense.
Of course.
I like to think he went down there and just found like a bit of an arm or maybe a charred torso or something really horrific, but that's just me. I'm very dark.
I mean, but even if you say Avon's got these moments, it still bothers me that no one else does. That everybody else just seems to completely brush this aside. Like when Tarrant asks if Avon's dead, he doesn't seem to have any sort of emotional reaction. When Paul Darrow says, "Oh yeah, I'm sure," like, if you look at Stephen Pacey, there's like blank face, no reaction there. Dana seems completely unconcerned. Villa just gets drunk for the whole episode. Like,
you could argue that Villa's getting drunk because he's grieving, and Tarrant was injured trying to rescue Callie, so that suggests that he cared. And Avon, there's definitely signs that he cared as well. I mean, this is me having watched these episodes over and over again, and you realize there are bits in there, and you just need to dig a little bit deeper, I think. But but certainly the first time I watched it, I was like, wow, no one gives a damn about it. It's quite shocking. But that's very Blake 7 too. It's not the sort of series where they would all sit around crying and hugging each other. They wouldn't do like a hologram of Callie appearing saying what she means, what they all meant to her. And Jan Chappell herself has said, I actually do wish I'd gone back and at least done a death scene, but I wouldn't have wanted Avon crying over my body. She even suggested actually to when she did go in to record those two words, and you're right, I think she was there, you think she'd at least said a bit more, but she suggested to Via Lorimer that when the explosion goes off, you see bits of green leather fly into the air and maybe a little bit of permed hair.
Jesus.
But she said she thought it was actually quite a good way for Callie to go, because on a number of occasions she was left behind. If you think back to Series A, when they all thought she'd been killed in that explosion there,
that's
quite a couple of times. Really. But I think under the circumstances, I think they handled the death quite well. And you've got to remember, it was, like we said earlier, it's almost been 2 years since the last episode. Mm-hmm. If you keep harping on about a character who's no longer there, you want to get on with and introduce the new characters and the new setting, Well, even Blake, though, if you think about that, it was, where's Blake? Oh, he's gone with Jenna. Where's Jenna? Oh, she's gone with Blake. Oh, okay. It's actually, at least here we hear Callie's voice. We didn't hear Gareth Thomas or Sally Nivette in it. I mean, they were mentioned more, I guess, but they do move on pretty swiftly there. And Callie is mentioned a few more times.
I mean, the death itself to me is pretty good. Like I said, my problem is with the rest of the episode when no one seems to actually give a damn.
Yeah, they could have.
I mean, like, even with Gan, we got that moment of silence where everyone looked somber. Like I said, Stephen Pacey doesn't seem to have any sort of emotional reaction to Paul Darrow saying, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure she's dead." So
it would have been maybe nice if, like, when they were flying off the planet, if maybe Villa or Avon had said goodbye, Callie, or something. But that in itself, it's a bit cheesy. It's like when Kirk flies away from Genesis and he's like, "Goodbye, David." But that's Star Trek. That's very emotional and touchy-feely, whereas Blake 7 is, these guys don't really even like each other. They are together for mutual convenience.
I mean, there's this other moment too that I'm thinking of that again shows they really didn't seem to care when they have all the wine glasses, and then Dana goes, if Callie hadn't died, there wouldn't be too many glasses. But she says it like so emotionlessly that it's like, did you even care that Callie's dead? Because it's a good point that if there's an extra wine glass, they were considering Callie being there, and then she just kind of goes, "Yeah, if Callie wasn't dead, there'd be the right number of wine glasses." Like pretty much exactly like that.
Just one more for me then.
Yeah, and Phil was just like, "Yeah, more for me." It's like that was like the real moment. Was like, is anybody like actually affected by this death?
But those are all the moments you're mentioning are the ones that I noticed as well, but I mean, I saw it the complete opposite way, right? I thought these were moments where they actually
what
do
did you have
care
pulled out of that moment where they cared? Because Villa just brushes his eyes, more wine for me.
Yeah, I mean, Villa's, and John, you mentioned this, Villa's getting drunk in this episode as, as a way of grieving, I guess.
Yeah, it's a possible interpretation. I mean, Callie's death and Villa's reaction to it is very specifically mentioned further down the line, so it's almost like they realized maybe and thought we'd better put in a few lines later. But yeah, I've swung both ways, but that's a different story. But I started off thinking, it was very badly handled, but over time I've realized actually, I think there is enough there if you want to dig a bit deeper. And I think it's quite clever the way Chris Boucher used her absence. The fact that there is one wine glass too many. I actually think that's quite clever. But it might have been nice if Dana and Villa had been a little bit more somber in that moment. And the fact that when Dorian goes down into the basement, he mentions the death of the telepath. That's going to make things more difficult. It implies that he knows a lot about it.
I thought he said it would make things easier. I was pretty sure that line he was like, it's going to make things easier. Maybe I just misheard the line, but I was pretty sure he said that would make things easier.
It's definitely the death of the telepath will make things more difficult, or something like that.
Maybe I misheard the line then.
So maybe if Callie had been in this episode, maybe she would have been the one who went down to the basement, because this was written with her in it.
Right.
So perhaps she would have been and if she had agreed to come back for one episode, we have to assume that she would have died in that basement, or she would have either died right at the start on film if she'd only agreed to come back to do one day's filming, or she would have been in the whole episode and died in the basement, which could have been a bit of a downer. But it's quite interesting. She was in all the other scripts. The poor old Glynis Barber, she used to get handed scripts and it just had Callie crossed out and Sulin written in pen over the top. It was that last minute. They really thought she was coming back. So I guess it makes it all the more impressive that they actually did still manage to write her out effectively at all.
So they introduced Sulin as a Callie replacement. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah. It's interesting.
Was Sulin always in the story, even when Callie was in it, and then after the story, or after Jan Chapel was like, I'm not coming back, they were like, oh, do you want to come back, Sulin? Was that
Unfortunately, the draft script, it might exist somewhere, but I've never seen it, and I've tried, all the people I've spoken to, no one has ever seen that draft script, but it was definitely written. But I've seen the script for episode 3 and episode 5 of this season, and Callie's there, but Sulin isn't. Mm-hmm. But I remember there's an interview with Paul Darrow, and he suggested that Sulin would have been introduced early on, and they would have both been in it for a while. But that might have been him just misinterpreting what actually happened. But presumably, Sulin wouldn't have been there at all, or if she was, then she would have died at the end with Dorian, presumably.
Right. It seems likely that would have been the case, or that she would have, maybe survived and just been one of those characters who just doesn't go along with them.
Who just doesn't appear next week.
Yeah.
Well, you haven't seen next week's episode yet, have you, Power?
Not yet.
No.
Okay, I won't say anything.
I suspect she would have died. I thought she was going to die in this episode at first, and then
I knew she was joining them.
After she didn't die, I figured out that she was part of the crew now.
We're kind of jumping about all over the place, aren't we? That's my fault.
A little bit. Okay, well, so Callie's dead. Dana and Villa fall down a hall. And then...
and then we meet Dorian.
And then, Dorian saves him. Dorian's name, an obvious reference to Dorian Gray. So,
and what did you think of Dorian?
I really thought Dorian was going to be the one to join the crew, honestly, right up until halfway through when it was revealed that it was an evil maniacal genius who wanted to kill everyone.
I wish he had. I think it would have been great if they'd kept him on. Maybe not for the whole season, but if he'd done maybe 3 or 4 episodes, I think that would have been great. I think he's a fascinating character and a really great actor, Jeffrey Burridge. Who
I was really bothered by his physical acting later on, though. It seemed really overacted.
I think I prefer him when we first see him. He's in the grey kind of boiler suit, and he's playing the part of a salvage guy. And I think when you actually see him and he's in his velvet trouser suit and he's got all the orange makeup on and his performance gets a little bit camper. Yes. I think certainly he's still good, but I think he's much better in these early scenes.
Right, and that sort of salvager persona that he's playing, right? That's the character that I was like, I wish this character would sort of join them and be part of the crew.
Yeah, exactly, and that would have been fantastic. And then maybe with subtle hints that there's something else going on. And what did you guys think of the Scorpio and Slave?
I loved all of it. Well, I did not think that they were going to. I knew about Scorpio, and I didn't think it was going to live up to the Liberator in any way. But I really like the sets. I really like what's introduced here.
As soon as they introduced Slave, I was like, God damn it, another supercomputer in this universe that supposedly only had ORAC.
That was one hell of a sigh.
And that's basically what I did when they introduced Slave, though, because, I mean, okay, it doesn't actually bother me that much.
But I'd be concerned if it did.
But what bothers me is that, you know, they made this huge point, like, oh, Aurak is this supercomputer that, like, nobody in the universe has. But then in Series C, we meet Ultra, who's, like, way more advanced than Aurak. We meet Moloch, who's way more advanced than Aurak is. Now we meet Slave, who is basically on the same level as Zen being another one of the most advanced computers in the galaxy. It feels like every time they introduce another one, the universe feels like it just gets smaller to me.
Well, I mean, that's part of the Series C thing, though, right? In Series A and B, there was this monopoly of information, and there was this control of information, and then once that's sort of unleashed, it's just anyone's game.
But I'm talking outer universe. It makes the universe feel smaller because it feels like we keep getting the same thing over and over and over again.
I mean, Slave is useless, though. I mean, he is. I mean, I know they say he's highly sophisticated, but apart from that reference to him being highly sophisticated, he's actually useless. And he's never of any, again, mild spoilers. He's never of any help to the crew at all. He's always just kind of all bumbling and apologetic. So
it's a good thing they've got.
I hear what you're saying. It is a bit like another. Well, they've got to give Peter Tuddenham the work, I guess. But I like him. I think it's a great design and. Yeah.
I really like the design of Slave, actually. Right. I think of all the supercomputers we've met, Slave is the best looking one. I put Aurak probably second.
And I mean, we talk about the sort of reduced, possibly budget of this, but, you know, it seems there was a bit of money, you know, went into Slave.
Certainly in setting everything up, yeah. And the people who made Slave, it was a chap called Richard Gregory and his company Imagineering, and they, because of Slave, they then got recommended to work on Doctor Who, where they did the New Look Cybermen and all kinds of other creatures in Doctor Who as well. So they were a freelance company, so they did spend money on it. You know, they went out externally and got this prop made, and it was a fully functional prop that was integrated into the set. And those guys, you know, like a lot of people working on effects in Blake 7, they went the extra mile to make it look as good as possible. And it paid off for them, you know, because that was a showcase for them, and it led to them working on Doctor Who for the next 4 or 5 years. So,
I mean, Slave looks really cool. Great.
Yeah.
Like, Slave was by far my favorite looking thing of this entire story, though I'm glad that Avon's big gauntlet gloves came back.
Yeah.
Yeah, those gloves, they're great, aren't they? And yeah. And what do you think of the Scorpio as well? I mean, I love the whole aesthetic of Series D. I think it's fantastic. It really is.
I mean, I really like the outside design of Scorpio. The bridge, I said, was super underwhelming to me because it feels just like a rectangle. The Liberator's bridge felt very dynamic. Like there was a lot of open space in the front. We had Zen on the one wall, and then we had all the consoles. And then in front of the consoles, we still had that kind of staging area that they used for a lot of just kind of general purpose things where they talk about their plans. They had the little couch there. And yeah, I get Scorpio's a smaller ship, but there's still ways to make a small bridge seem interesting. And the way that this one is just set up, it feels very, this is a room we had in the BBC warehouse, like an actual rectangular room. What can we do with it? Because it feels very rectangular. And that's all I can really say about it, is that it feels rectangular.
I mean, I really liked it. I think it does a great job of just giving you this impression like this is chump change compared to the Liberator. It's a smaller ship. It's a worse ship all around, and no question about it.
Yeah.
Right. But it feels very dull. I mean, even if you look at the control panels, like you would expect an older ship to have more actual manual controls than the Liberator, since the Liberator was so automated. But like Terran's control panel is like the width of like a notepad, and then there's like all this empty space on the console that's like completely unused, and you still see it in the shot. Like they don't even frame the shot so that it's just the actual control panel to make it look more complex than it is. You see this whole empty control panel, and you're like, but they have all this space.
I'm with you on that. That control panel is unfortunate. It looks like the inside of a chocolate box that's just been flipped over, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In fact, that might well be what it was. But yeah, there's some. I quite like because when we first see Dorian, he's looking down at that kind of like a scope thing, almost like what Mr. Spock used to look at on the Enterprise bridge. So you see, there are a few nice little bits and pieces there, but it's not the Liberator, obviously. But I think it is good that they went for a contrast, and it's something much more basic.
I mean, you can do basic without making it look boring, though, is the thing. And it
Well,
just
it
looks
doesn't
boring.
look
I mean, but I
boring.
like the wall with slave on, and then there's the teleport kind of pad next to it. But then you pan around to the rest of it, and you're like, well, bloody hell, what the hell is the rest of this ship? Like, what the
You see
hell
a
is the
little
rest
bit
of this
more of
set?
it. You will see a little bit more as time goes by, but
And then it looked like the little gun rack was just filmed against, like, they just found a random wall and set up the gun rack
I
prop
think that's
and-
what it was. Just in the ship itself, like in universe, it was just against a wall.
But like the way it's filmed, and like Dana calls Villa over, and then we cut to them standing what seemed like just against a wall outside the BBC center where they set up this console and they were talking, and I was like, I would have liked to actually have seen like the console in front of the gun rack in the front of the frame to actually emphasize that this is a really small bridge, but instead having the gun rack in this completely open area is like, so where's this open area and why are they not utilizing it for more of the bridge?
yeah, I guess.
I think you're saying all the wrong things today, Dylan. I'm in complete disagreement.
Yeah, me too. We're just going to team up against you.
I mean, you're allowed to do that.
But hey, maybe you'll warm up to it.
Maybe you'll sour on it.
Yeah, maybe by the end of this season we'll be flipped.
I think you're making very valid points. I just don't necessarily agree with them. But I think you are right sometimes.
Sometimes.
So they have Dorian sort of at gunpoint because Slave will only listen to him, which is interesting.
I don't know how they're going to get around that.
Maybe they're not. I mean, maybe
So
that's...
he rescues. Yeah, he appears, doesn't he? He rescues Dana and Villa, and then Tarrant and Avon.
Well, I want to talk about this before we continue, because it's actually right before this. There's a shot where Villa goes after Dana, and it zooms in on Aurak being left behind on the ground, and I thought that the plot of this episode was going to be, oh no, we left Aurak behind.
same
Where's
here.
Aurak going to be?
I thought it was going to be something regarding Aurak.
As soon as they get on Scorpio, you just see Villa carrying Aurak in the background, and then I really had to wonder like what the point of the shot where they zoomed in on Aurak like that was, because they do it again with the gun they took from the Liberator, but that actually comes into play later, which really made me question even more what the point of that shot of Aurak just left behind on the grass was.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, and maybe they just needed to cut away to something.
Possibly, yeah. I just rationalized it to myself later on. It's just a time-filling scene, yeah.
Yeah.
Remind people what Aurak is, because Aurak has a small role in this. Or not even really a role at all.
Well,
he's taken out of action,
his role is
isn't
to
he? That's
set
the
up
thing,
his role later on in the season, which is to fix the teleport thing that Dorian was trying to build.
And I think they had to remove him from the action just to show how hopeless things were for the crew. And if he was functioning, he could go on the Scorpio and just take over Slave and everything would be fine. So I can see why they did it. I think Chris Boucher wanted to make it as tough as possible. So he basically removed all the things that had been, at the end of Terminal, they had the base, they had the ship, they had Aurak. It actually wasn't such a bad, it was a bad situation, but it wasn't terrible. And then they lose all of that, including Aurak temporarily. So I think it's quite clever.
Right.
And it's great when he does start working again. He's only in it briefly, but he gets some great lines. He gets, it gets some great lines.
Well, we call him he here,
yeah.
If only because Peter Tuddenham, who voices Aurak, is a he.
Yeah, I think it's Avon always is the only one who calls Aurak it.
Yeah, because I think Villa at least always refers to him as he.
Yeah, I think in some of the big Finnish scripts, Paul Darrow always changes it. So if the script says it has Avon referring to Aurak as he, Paul Darrow always changes it to it.
Good on him.
Good on him for consistency.
I know,
although
he's
I was going to say I've never noticed that on the show before, so.
No, but I actually think that's really cool. Like,
I
Paul
appreciate
Darrow
it.
is kind of high strung about some Blake 7, about Blake 7 in general, sometimes.
Yeah,
but
he's dedicated though about it. He's lived and breathed that character for 40 years, hasn't he? And you've got to watch him in Series D. He's relatively restrained here. But you'll notice his hair's a lot bigger. And
does he do a John Pertwee thing where as the seasons go on, his hair gets bigger?
Do that. All the doctors
Series
do that.
D, Paul Darrow he's like a god to me. I've tried to model myself on him. He is fantastic. Some people just think he goes over the top, and he does, but you cannot take your eyes off him. His performance gets bigger and bigger as the series goes on, and it's just brilliant. You've got some treats coming up. It's definitely a more. I mean, I think Paul Darrow is a great actor, but you think how subtle he is in Series A, and his performance just gets bigger as the series goes on. But in Series D, it just goes through the roof. And some people say it's because Avon has basically gone mad. So we're saying he doesn't seem to care about Callie, but a lot of people say no, he does. He's gone. Oh, this has pushed him over the edge. He's just lost Blake, the Liberator, and Callie in the space of a few hours. And a lot of people say that is why he is so extreme in Series D, because he has actually gone stark raving mad. And it is actually a very convincing argument, because it explains, it's possibly the only explanation for his behavior as the series goes on. So, but it's a lot of fun to watch. He is just, no one else could act like this. It's a unique performance. He's brilliant.
Yeah, that sounds really promising.
But you should have Avon watch every week. You know,
Avon watch.
Your regular feature, just like how stratospheric is his performance this week?
I mean, we've still got, does Avon hold it like a 6-shooter?
Which he does. He holds their new guns. He
actually, new guns that look a lot like Han Solo's blaster from New Hope. But anyway.
Yeah, when Solo was coming out, or there was promotional material, like artwork or whatever released for Solo, a lot of people online were posting, the gun that Lando holds in that, against Avon, holding one of these guns.
I mean, these guns look a lot like Han Solo's blaster, which I can say definitively because I watched Solo on the flight out and I watched this on the flight back, so it was like a span of a couple days between the two.
But were those guns in Solo based on the original film? Because I thought that when I saw the posters, and I don't know as much about Star Wars as a lot of people, but they definitely look like the Scorpio guns, but I thought maybe that's what they look like in the Star Wars films. I don't know.
Yeah, they do. That's what they look like or that's what Han's looks like in A New Hope.
Oh, right, okay.
And so that's why in this I was kind of wondering if there was like some Star Wars influence on the prop designers, which isn't a bad thing. I'm not complaining about this, obviously.
Oh, no, there is. That's a really good point. If you look at the Scorpio, it is the Millennium Falcon. It's just it's narrower. They've squashed it. And the designer said it was very influenced by Star Wars and Alien, and they wanted it to look a lot more dirty and used, to make the tech look real. And they've just come right out and said this is Scorpio is a direct homage to the Millennium Falcon. So there's definitely an influence there.
Right. I think in some capacity, if you're making a science fiction series, or if you're doing, something set in space that's fantastical in the late 70s, early 80s, you're interacting with Star Wars, you're responding to Star Wars in some way, whether that's paying homage or being indirectly influenced by, or going intentionally in an opposite direction. You're interacting with Star Wars in some way, I think.
Oh, definitely. I totally agree with that. I mean, I think Blake 7 is often criticised, saying, it was the BBC's response to Star Wars, and that's not true at all. it was in production long before anyone really knew about Star Wars. So, right. But I think you're right. Definitely, certainly by this point, the influence is there in lots of different ways, and the way they filmed the models, we can talk about that later. But it definitely affected the effects guys. And a lot of these guys, Bill Pearson, for instance, he works on Series D, some of the effects, and he didn't work on Star Wars, but he came straight off Alien and then went back to the BBC and started working on Blake 7. So you've got people actually working on these big budget productions and then bringing that over to Blake 7 as well. So, so that was it. And there's that lovely shot of Scorpio, and we see it actually on the planet. So they would take this massive model on location, and there's some really lovely shots in this episode and future ones as well, where you actually see the Scorpio landing, which just looks fantastic. And of course, there's that amazing sequence when it's going down into
I was just going to mention that.
Yeah, and I think that's got to be the best model sequence ever in Blake 7. I think that is just stunning, and fortunately you see it practically in every episode moving forward. And I could watch it on a loop for 45 minutes. I think it's just really stunning, and it's just another example of the visual effects team really going the extra mile. Just it didn't have to be as good as that. They didn't really have the money or the time, but they just went the extra mile, and I just think that is just a great example of what can be done with, if you've got the right people working on it. It's not just about money, it's about love, really. And I think a lot of those guys did put a lot of love into Blake 7. Unfortunately, a lot of the effects work this series, because whereas in earlier seasons they did a lot of it on film,
right?
In this series, partly because of the budget and just to make it faster, they basically, a lot of the model footage is actually just done in studio. It's not on film. It's just against a blue CSO background. So unfortunately, a lot of there's some great models in coming episodes, but the way they're shot, they just don't look quite as good. You can often see a big circle around Scorpio, for instance. You might have noticed that in this one even. So it's all very electronic looking rather than film, which is a shame, because the models themselves just look incredible.
Well, videotape is cheaper than film, so...
Yeah, exactly.
Although lower quality, and it means we're never going to get those full upscale read-ins of the film sequences like they've done with Star Trek. So they filmed Star Trek on film.
Yeah.
Which is a real bummer, but I understand. I mean, coming from Doctor Who, where basically all of the episodes in most of the classic series were filmed on videotape, not really a surprise in any way.
Yeah, well, you still have film throughout Blake 7. All the location stuff is always on film. It's just the model... And you do get some model stuff on film as well. If you actually see the Scorpio on a planet, that will always look good because it's on film and it just looks great. But it's just when it's all the space stuff that they just said, look, we don't have time to do a 2-week film shoot of just model sequences. They were just doing it very last minute. Sometimes actually in studio, just it was the last thing. 10 to 10 at night. It's like, okay, I think they were just like literally flying some of it like a paper airplane, just throw it across the studio. Hope for the best. So there is some pretty shonky stuff coming up, but you often, if you see photographs of the actual models that were used, they look incredible. But when you actually see them on screen, they just don't look. You can see the big blue lines around them and what have you, which is a shame.
Yeah, that's a shame.
I really enjoyed the liftoff scene, though. They're trying to get Scorpio off the ground, and there's some great dialogue with Tarrant there. They ask him, if he's
how many times he's done this before. Right. And Tarrant's like once, and Villa's like when. And he's like in about 1 minute and 35 seconds.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, that's quite a great sequence, isn't it? And you mentioned like stock footage from Volcano earlier, so it's all the lava and what have you. I think it's really well done.
Yeah, because apparently Terminal's blowing up too. Liberator Q is just bad luck for these planets.
I mean, Servalan really wanted them dead, didn't she? I mean, she's set a hell of a lot of explosives here to the whole planet's going up, basically. So, yeah, a few people have theorized that maybe Callie didn't die in that explosion, but
she didn't
die in the explosion, then she certainly died when this massive volcano went off. So, yeah.
There's an indication that Dorian is not who he says he is before he actually meets the Liberator crew, because when he arrives, he's like, oh, is that the Liberator? Because they're looking for the Liberator, and he sees like
there are a lot of
debris from an explosion. He's like, "Is that the Liberator?"
He went there to get the Liberator and get them as well. Yeah, definitely. I think he's a bit of a Blake 7 fan. He's like modeling. He's got a ship with a talking computer on there. He's got his teleport bracelets and he's obviously done his research on each of them. He's basically me, isn't he? He's me in space.
Uh-oh.
But slightly more
watch
dashing.
out, John. Dorian's coming for your job.
He can have it.
Dorian's got hundreds of years to do your job too.
That's how long it takes. But I don't have a creature in my basement, keeping me young looking. That's the only downside.
Well, so we land on Xenon base,
right?
And we meet Sulin. And
who knows Dorian? She's been working with Dorian for some amount of time at least. So I'm pretty sure she doesn't know his deep dark secret, right?
No,
she doesn't know. But yeah, I imagine we'll find out much more about her background and her history with Dorian in coming episodes.
I mean, I would hope so.
Oh,
but I'm not expecting anything.
I mean, poor old Glynis Barber, I really like her. And again, in the second half of the series, they work out how to write for her. It's actually episode 6. Keep an eye on episode 6. And she just comes into her own. as I said earlier, she was just getting Callie's lines, so she literally didn't have a character. And she said in interviews, I was given one piece of paper that had a bit of background on the character, but nothing was there in the scripts. And it's only as the series progresses that she really grows into the role, and she just finds a way of making the character different than what came before. So I think she's great.
Kind of reminds me of on Doctor Who, actually, right about this time, Perry. Forgetting who plays Perry now, completely flown my mind.
Nicola Bryant.
Bryant. She was saying how she came up with this whole long backstory for Perry so that she could portray the character the way she wanted. She came up with this whole long backstory about her family and her parents and her relations.
And some of that made it into audio.
Some of it made it into later audios. Some of it came through on screen because we meet her weird, creepy uncle. But
I think she also said that she'd, in her mind, come up with reasons why Perry would go off with the Fifth Doctor and things about his specific personality. And she didn't know, obviously, that he was going, a few episodes later, and Colin Baker was coming in. So I think that was a bit of a shock.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Doctor sacrifices himself to save her and then immediately tries to kill her. So that must have been a shock.
Do you know why I think he does that? Because she never says thank you. She doesn't know. She never says, "Oh, thank you so much for saving me," and she just.
I think that can be forgiven for the fact that she doesn't know what the hell is going on.
Yeah, and she didn't deserve to get throttled, to be fair.
I don't think anyone deserves to be throttled by Colin Baker.
By Colin Baker.
By Colin Baker specifically.
I know people who would pay good money to be throttled by Colin Baker.
Yeah, let's just end that conversation right there.
They're not good people.
And we return to Blake's universe of Blake 7.
Well, Colin Baker is on Blake 7.
Well, yes, and I was also going to say, according to Chris Boucher, they're the same universe.
Yeah.
Because Chris Boucher, if you didn't know, John wrote some, not exactly fan audios, but not entirely BBC sanctioned audios.
Oh, yeah, it's all the Caldor
City audios.
Yeah, they're really good.
But Blake 7 and Doctor Who in the same universe.
Well, Paul Darrow is playing Avon in those. I don't care what anyone says. He's. Have you heard them? The ones from the Alan Stevens did?
No.
I recommend that you listen to them after you finish this, after you finish the Blake 7, because he's not called. I think it's called Caston Iago, but it's Avon. It is so blatantly Avon. I mean, they in some of the later ones they expand his backstory a little bit. Well, that sounds a bit rude, but they develop the character and they make it clear that it can't be Avon. But in the first few episodes, when he draws his gun, it's the sound that the Scorpio clip guns make when you draw it, and he just acts like Avon, and Paul Darrow plays it like Avon. So it definitely feels like a continuation of Blake 7, and it's Chris Boucher's universe, so it just reeks of Blake 7. It's great.
As many things Chris Boucher writes do.
Yeah.
So we're on Xenon base. They're all getting drunk on wine. There seems to be some sort of implied passage of time here because they all change outfits.
And Avon takes a bath, as he indicates later.
Yeah, that terrible line. While I was bathing. That's possibly the first real sign of Series D, Paul Darrow. There's a lot more like that. Just
great.
Just milks it, while I was bathing.
Well, I mean, I was going to say that's the first real indication you've had that any of the Liberator crew actually do any personal hygiene. One thing that I really hope Scorpio brings back is the treasure room. Sorry, I just wanted to get that.
Nah, there's not going to be a treasure room on Scorpio.
It's floating around in space now with the rest of the Liberator. That's it.
Maybe there'll be a bathing room instead where Avon can take his baths.
It does conjure up an image, though, doesn't it? Of Sue Lin sneaking in while Avon's having a bath, and you just say, "Oh, this is going somewhere really strange." I don't know.
I mean, just images that correlate with Avon's weird leather fetish. So,
well, yeah, he finds an outfit that's actually remarkably similar to the one he's wearing at the start, isn't he? And actually, while we're talking about their outfits, if you notice that Taran and Dana and Avon are all wearing their terminal costumes, but they actually got it wrong with Villa. They gave him an outfit he'd wore in, I think it was Ultra World and Moloch, but it's not the one he was wearing in Terminal, so he somehow managed to change clothes in that gap. So that's an unfortunate mistake, but maybe he found a locker of clothes in that underground base on Terminal. I don't know, but
maybe the clothes drifted down from the exploded carcass of the Liberator.
Possibly. Of course, again, there was almost 2 years between episodes, and no one, when watching this, would have picked up on that. It's just people like me who mention it just to be really vindictive and cruel 40 years later.
Well, they all change outfits halfway through anyway, so thankfully we don't actually have to really worry about that too much, because and
they stay in those outfits for the next 6 episodes as well.
Oh, yikes. So much for personal hygiene.
Yeah, they do. Unfortunately, they each character only has 2 costumes in the whole of this series. They change midway through.
Well, maybe that is another indication that the budget may have taken a bit of a dip.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, Glynis Barber was not happy at all, because she said that, in the old series they used to get amazing costumes every episode, and in this one, she just had the same outfit. So her hair changes every episode. That was her compromise. She said, "Look, if I can't have different clothes, I'm going to have a different hairstyle in every episode." So that's what happened. That's another segment you should have. You should have What's Sulin's hair doing this week?
What's Sulin's hair doing this week? I mean, the whole of Series D, at least so far, all we've seen in this episode,
the one episode we watched,
feels very grungy compared to the other 3 seasons. The Liberator was white,
we're moving
and
into the 80s.
spacious, and the
Scorpio
is like tiny and brown and dusty and dirty, and everyone's only got one outfit. It's very grunge aesthetic.
Yeah, and that was part of the brief. Really, they said it can't be as easy for them this year, and they don't have it easy at all. They don't have a massive wardrobe full of clothes. They don't have the room on the Liberator with all the precious treasures in it. And this episode actually feels more like Series C than some of the others, just because they're wearing these outfits. The Liberator's mentioned at least, and halfway through the episode it becomes it feels much more like the ones that come later, because they're in the new clothes, they're on the base, and it feels very much like how the series is going to be moving forward.
Well, this reminded me a lot of Spacefall, second episode of Spacefall. Just in the aesthetic, like very cramped, small corridors, small, slow ships, fighting in cramped spaces. Everybody's holding everybody else at gunpoint for the entire episode, and the entire episode is done at gunpoint. So, I don't know. That's just what I was thinking when I was watching this.
Sure, I can see that.
And then, of course, we have Dorian then goes down into his basement, doesn't he? And we see that. Did you recognize the creature in his basement?
No, I heard on the YouTube comments that it's a sea devil.
It's a sea devil, yeah, exactly. And you mentioned John Nathan Turner earlier. He watched this. He found out that they were using a sea devil, and he went mad. He phoned up the Blake 7 production office, and Via Lorimer had to calm him down. And they say, "Look, don't worry, darling, don't worry. We keep it in the dry ice. No one will ever notice. No one will ever notice." But yeah, John Nathan Turner was not happy about that.
Of course, people noticed.
Of course, people noticed. I mean, there were people who watched this over and over and over again.
And
John.
Well, no, I mean, in this scene,
people who need to get out more.
In this initial scene, you don't actually get a good glimpse of it. Later on, you do.
Yeah, when it dies, you get a really good glimpse of it. Yeah, you're like, wait a minute.
A naked sea devil.
I don't know. There's a certain charm I find in that, knowing that the BBC's like reusing costumes between series. I don't know. It gives it that low budget charm that I think we mentioned when we were watching a lot of the Series A episodes. We're like, oh, this has that low budget 70s charm. Not like, man, this budget is so low that this is just hilariously trash. But there's like effort involved. But it's like you could tell it's kind of low budget, and because of that, you can tell these people like really cared about the show.
I quite like it as well. The idea, the BBC, that they're making all these amazing shows under one roof. Mm-hmm. These guys were going to the BBC bar and the canteen, and they all knew each other and they were socializing. You had people working on Doctor Who one week, Blake 7 the next, and then Rent a Ghost or whatever, all these really talented people. And I think, so what if they use the same costumes and props? Why wouldn't you? It's all there under one roof, and they don't do it that often. It's not as though it's every week you recognize something. Actually, it kind of is, but I love that. I just love BBC Sci-Fi generally, and it's just if that is enough to take you out of an episode, then you probably won't like this kind of TV. Because it is dated, of course it is. It's nearly 40 years old now, so it's a part of TV history now. So I think you just got to view it on those terms, really.
Right, and I mean, look, it's not as if Sea Devils are from Blake 7, right? So it's not like this continuity thing within Blake 7. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
No,
yeah.
And also the I don't know, maybe you can also.
It would have been worse if Moloch was in there or something.
Yeah, if they brought back like Moloch or Ultra, but the Sea Devils. I don't know if this is an original Sea Devil costume, if it's one that they made for Warriors of the Deep, which
it's an original. This was 1981, and then
the Sea Devils, the serial The Sea Devils would have aired 71, I want to say it was, or 72, maybe 73, 74.
There's in the Master season, so whatever that was.
Was that 70?
Yeah, it was season 9, wasn't it? Yeah, so 72. 70, yeah.
So by this point, that's nearly 9 years ago. If you're watching this and you're like, man, I remember that Sea Devil from 9 years ago, you're like, okay, well, maybe you've got your priorities backwards.
Yeah.
Right? But I was just going to say, I feel like some of that low budget stuff is lost, now because TV programs are made on such a high budget. I feel like when you've got a high budget, it's really easy to disguise whether you actually care about the show or not. When there's a low budget like this, I feel like, there's no hiding. Either you really care about the show and it comes across in how creatively you can use that low budget you've got, or you just don't give a damn, and then it comes across on screen as really janky and kind of crappy. But Blake 7 is one of those shows that I think you can really tell that the people working on the show enjoy it and like it and want to make a good product.
Oh, definitely. And I think the fact that they enjoyed making it as well comes across. I mean, I know it was tough to work on it, but there was a lot of really talented people working on it with very few resources. So yeah, I forgive it a lot. And then when it does go badly wrong, you think, you know what, I'd forgive it. And also I think it adds to the charm. It really does. Like Dorian's wig when he goes down to the basement.
Dorian's wig.
That's pretty bad, but that's part of the charm, I think.
Right. Well, we should mention what happens with Dorian next, because he comes up and he takes Avon at gunpoint, and Avon tries to shoot him, and he's like, haha, I took the control things out of your guns. And Avon's like, damn. Meanwhile,
there's
Dana
that great line from Avon as well about Aurak.
Yeah. Well, because Dorian fixes Aurak, and then Avon's like, oh, I imagined you'd have the tools to fix them around here, but I didn't think you'd do it yourself.
Then it turns out that Dorian knew Ensor as well, and
taught him everything he knows, apparently.
And bearing in mind how long Ensor was in hiding. So I think it's really clever, Chris Boucher bringing in these bits of history from Blake 7 and just filling in some of these gaps. I think that's why he wrote this one, because it had to reformat the show. It needed to be written by somebody like him who had that in-depth knowledge of the history. But there's a great line where Avon says something like, Ensor bequeathed Aurak to an associate of mine, who then bequeathed it to me. And it's just Paul Darrow again. It's just, I love it. It's just, he just takes a line, and there's some scenes where you can almost see Paul Darrow in the background. He knows his line. He's got a good line coming up, and it's almost like
Kitty in the background.
I can't wait to get to my line, and he never lets you down, And when he says he's working out all the things that Dorian's done, like the teleport,
slave,
all those, the slave and Scorpio and all those tunnels and all the other stuff he's been doing. And then Avon says, what do you do in your spare time? And then he does that massive cheesy smile as well. It's great.
Well, I hope he doesn't start stepping on people's lines like he sometimes did to Jenna.
Yeah, there was a specific episode I'm remembering, but I don't remember what episode it was in Series B, where I know I had a huge problem with Paul Darrow in that episode because the dialogue started to feel super unnatural because Paul Darrow started to step on Jenna's lines specifically and a couple other people's, because he was just so eager to say his lines. He kind of ran into the end of other people's lines in one of those episodes, and it was like Horizon really or something like that.
Yeah, there might be a bit of that coming up.
Paul!
But he's so good, you can forgive him again, you know.
I mean, in that episode, I know I didn't forgive him. I tore into him pretty hard in that episode because, like, this is the least natural-sounding dialogue in all of Blake 7, and I hate it because it ruined the episode for me.
Well, not even that. Just, like, as an actor, he was being unprofessional.
Yeah, that was the other thing. And I was like, why didn't the director just go, Paul, can you just, like, wait half a second longer?
I think he is out. It's a bit like Tom Baker. I think by this stage, Paul Darrow is out of control, a bit like Tom Baker was in season 16 and 17. But that I think was Tom Baker at his best, and it couldn't have gone on. You know, I'm glad that they did have a word eventually. But
yeah, that was the thing. They did restrain Tom Baker at, you know, when they get to season 18. They're like, Tom, you got to like dial it back 3 notches. Right?
Yeah, and then he left, didn't he? And that was because it was a new team coming in. But here, I think maybe David Maloney was restraining him a little bit, and because it's a new producer now, he's just off the leash. But he's still he's so good though. It's like Tom Baker. He's like, you can't watch anyone else. But if Paul Darrow's on the screen, you don't really care who else is because you're just watching him. Yeah. So I don't think he talks over people's lines, but when other people are talking, you can see Paul Darrow in the background, like, when's my line? It's coming up. I'm going to nail this, and he goes straight into it, and it's very theatrical and over the top, but you can justify it and say that Avon, by this stage, is a megalomaniac. He's gone doolally, and and I think maybe Paul Darrow had as well. I don't know. I don't want to go on about it too much. It's not like a pantomime. It's not so over the top you can't watch it, but you should definitely watch how his performance progresses as the weeks go by.
No, it's all good. Yeah, I'm really enjoying him so far.
There are some really good guest actors coming up as well. So you've got other big people on the screen as well, you know, so that can almost match him. So it does balance out a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think you kind of have to have someone there who can balance them out. You know, going back to Tom Baker, you had Lala Ward, who could kind
refused to even act if he wasn't like behaving properly.
Yeah, basically who could like rein Tom in, was like, Tom, if you want to do this, you got to like chill. And also Mary Tam, you know, who were like, they could play off of Tom Baker and match him in energy and kind of match him in the episode acting-wise.
And here you've got Michael Keating and Glynis Barber, actually, as the series goes on. She has a great rapport with Paul Darrow. Those two characters bounce off each other quite well. So he is through the roof, but he does come back down to earth when it really matters, you know.
Well, I want to talk about her for a second because they introduce her in much the same way that we meet Dana. I mean, using the same introduction, not the same way, because obviously Dana's father dies, but they introduce her as like the greatest warrior in the universe, but she was trained by the second best warrior in the universe, but she killed him because he killed her entire family. And it's like, man, that sounds really familiar. Because when we meet Dana, we're like, oh, Dana's one of the greatest warrior weapon makers in the universe, the greatest warrior. She's all about fighting. And when in Dana's introduction episode in, what was it called? Aftermath. She's like, she does all that fighting and she kills all those people. And then when we meet, what's her name here? She's like, Su Lin. She's like, best fighter ever. And then, you know, Avon's like, well, when she has a gun.
Well, she almost seemed like a combination of Dana and Dana's adopted sister, whose name I'm forgetting.
The one who gets
killed?
Yeah. I was going to say brutally murdered. But
right, because she's... Right, Lauren.
Right, Lauren?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Lauren. Very normal name.
Very normal name for this universe.
Shirley.
Well, Blake 7 has always done that, right? We have...
we mention every time we bring up a weird name.
It has. Yeah, I almost didn't say that because I thought it might provoke it.
Might provoke the exact same response from Keon every time it comes up.
Yeah, basically. I think you're right. I think that's a really good point. You know, you've got Dana, who's a weapons expert, and then they bring in, I think the difference is that Dana's an expert on the weapons, whereas Su Lin is an expert, you know, she's the fastest drawer in the galaxy. But you've basically got two characters who are obsessed with guns, and there's maybe not that much of a difference between them.
Right, because at least in this episode, we start to see, finally we see Tarrant falling into like a specific role that he's going to actually have to use now because we don't have Zen in that he's the pilot. You know, for once it's actually starting to pay off that we have a pilot. You know, Villa is the one who opens the doors, although he just patently refuses to open one in this episode, although presumably at some point he opens it so they can get into the Scorpio, considering Dorian's dead.
Well, there's this great moment, too, where he basically looks in the camera and he's like, you know what? I'm not going to do this.
But then he has to unlock the booze cabinet because he's like, man, kind of suspicious the guy keeps his booze under lock and key.
Yeah, Villa is great in this episode, isn't he? I mean, everyone still treats him like dirt in this episode, but he rescues Tarrant at the start. And he saves the day at the end of this episode, and he's basically brilliant throughout. Out of all of them, I would say he does the most to save the day, but they all still treat him with utter contempt.
Well, I think he's really turning it up in the act like a moron kind of thing he's got going on, because in Series C we learn that he's actually like probably one of, if not the smartest person on the Liberator, but he kind of just acts the fool, and it seems in this episode he really plays it up like a lot.
Yeah, he is slightly dumbed down in this last series, I think, Villa a little bit, but Michael Keating is so good, he manages to salvage it. But yeah, they do play up Villa's drinking a lot in this season, and he is a bit of a bumbling, almost like a caricature of what's come before. But because it's Michael Keating, he does manage to retain a certain quality. But he's I think of all the characters, he perhaps suffers the most. Certainly in the early parts of this season, he gets some really good stuff later on.
Well, so Dorian takes them all down to meet the Sea Devil.
Yeah, well, Dana and Tarrant go off. They go to sort of explore and see if there's any other way that they can get to Scorpio. Almost said the Liberator. I'm sure we're going to be making that mistake in the weeks to come. But they're seeing if they have any other options, really. And they go down into this basement area, far underground, actually. You don't get that impression when you just see Dorian on the bottommost level at first, but it's actually very far underground. And they run into
the Sea Devil.
The Sea Devil. I guess it's just called the creature.
Yeah, Dorian just refers to it as a creature, but the creature is implied.
Like Frankenstein's creature or something.
Or not implied, actually. The creature is revealed to be his partner
from 200 years ago.
Who went down into the cave with him.
Well, it's a bit strange because he mentioned that his partner was the first, because everyone says who was the first Dorian. So I think the implication is that he went down there with his partner, and then eventually he had to keep replacing. That's why he's got these guys down there. There's only so much one person can bear. So I don't know if it's meant to be, but then when he changes back, you just see a young guy lying there. So is the implication that he's reverted back to his partner, or it's a little bit confusing, I think.
Well, it's definitely ambiguous, and there's also they keep mentioning this room, right? It's this room that does it. So I got the impression that he went down there with his partner, and it was this room that sort of started all of this, turning his partner into the creature, and that was really a combination now of the room and the creature, but at first was just the room.
Well, my interpretation of it was that the room takes, I guess, Dorian's aging and puts it on another person and put it on his partner, but it became too much for his partner to bear, so they had to basically kill these people to keep the creature, which in my interpretation was this amalgamation of Dorian's age and sickness and disease, to keep that creature alive, because as long as the creature was alive, Dorian was too, because the creature would suction off everything that would kill Dorian. And that's why Dorian theorizes that if he kills all these people, the Liberator crew, because the Liberator crew cares about each other a lot, kind of bringing back that thing that I started to theorize last week in Series C, that Blake 7, at least Series C mostly, was a show about sentimentality and caring about each other. He theorizes that because these people care about each other so much, they'll be able to withstand or hold a lot more of Dorian's kind of disease and madness than just one person would.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and it's very explicitly stated here, isn't it? Dorian says you all care for each other. Mm-hmm. And then there was actually, the episode originally ended, there was another scene where they're back in the restroom, not the restroom, the recreational area, whatever you want to call it, upstairs in Xenon Base. And then Avon basically destroys the basement. He presses a button and it detonates that whole basement area. And he says, well, Dorian was clearly insane. And the implication was that when Dorian said, you all care for each other, Avon is basically saying, well, you must, he was clearly mad because I don't care about any of you.
Well, we had this discussion last week, which you won't have heard yet, John, but when this goes out, we'll have aired, where I bring it up originally, but we both kind of run with it, that, especially in what was last week's episode, Colin?
Terminal.
Terminal. There's a lot of mentions of like sentimentality and caring for each other. Avon says when he goes down that I didn't care for any of you, I didn't need any of you, I just needed the Liberator to get me to this planet, you can all leave. But then when he goes down to Blake says, oh, your sentimentality is showing. And there's also a scene where Avon basically says sentimentality makes you weak, and it kind of draws in all these plot threads all over the place that like the Liberator crew cares about each other, but I think a lot of them are like really bad at showing it, or a lot of them are in denial about it because, like Avon says, sentimentality makes you weak, or they just believe that sentimentality makes you weak. I don't know exactly what Blake 7 is saying on this. I think last week I theorized that it was saying mostly that you got to care for each other, but at the same time don't throw logic out the window.
Yeah, well, Chris Boucher always said that whenever he was writing a line for Avon, he always made it so it could be interpreted that Avon does something. It could be taken either way. He could be doing it for completely selfish reasons, or he could be doing it because he wants to do the right thing, but you're never quite sure what is motivating him. And that I think that is true in a lot of the episodes. He could be doing this because he wants to help, or it could be because it's in his best interest to do it. And I think there is always that ambiguity. I think it's very easy to think actually Avon does care. Underneath, he actually does really care about these people. He would just never show it. But then as this series goes on, you will see that actually maybe that isn't the case at all. Spoilers.
No, I know what you're talking about.
All our theories out the window.
I think I know.
No, I think you're right. I think I really, I think what you're saying there is so true. I think there is definitely an implication that he does care. And I recently got hold of the script for Terminal, and when that scene where they're all saying, we need you, and you need us, and there in the stage directions it does say for a moment Avon is visibly moved by this, so it's clearly implied that he does care a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And like we bring up in our episode on Terminal, there's that line in Series A where Avon says to Blake, I never understood why caring about someone meant you had to make stupid decisions. Or that's paraphrased, of course, but
right from Duel.
So
yeah,
that implies that he does care. He just doesn't feel the need to wear his heart on his sleeve.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that sort of thread has been there, since the beginning, really.
Right.
Definitely.
And it seems to be continuing here, especially when Dorian's like, you all care for each other, so you'll be able to bear more of my disease. Basically, in a way, he's saying you're stronger together than you are apart. And Avon actually says this when Tarrant passes out and Avon picks him up, and Tarrant's like, why'd you come back from me? And Avon's like, we're stronger together. And then Tarrant makes some snarky remark like, oh, so you can run away when the beast is eating me? And then Avon's like, well, or vice versa. But this whole episode seems also to be based around this idea that they're stronger as a crew than alone, especially, when Villa and Dana go off on their own. Like, the whole thing is that we should stick together, otherwise we're going to die on this man-made planet that's blowing up.
Right, and that's interesting that you bring that up, because this episode has, to me, maybe not a strong, but definitely a present horror vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And Dorian even says, like, I think he calls the creature like my horror or something like that. Or you're going to come face to face with my horror or something like that. And I've been reading a lot of John Clute lately, who's this theorist, and he talks a lot about horror and science fiction and fantasy. I have a written sort of response that I don't know if I want to read it anymore, but it's not long, but I don't know. Because I kind of saw Dorian as like this embodiment of, thinking of Clute, this embodiment of like horror itself, and which is really interesting because Blake 7 has never really tackled horror, I think.
It kind of approached it in Ultra World and Moloch. We get that kind of body horror in Ultra, where people's consciousnesses are wiped and joined with this massive brain, and their bodies just get used as drones. In Moloch, we get the idea that you can just copy whatever you want from people, and we get that horrific being in the wall in the life support system, the like massive 8-foot tall humanoid looking thing in that vat, which is just terrifying. Like, I think Blake 7 has always approached, or at least vaguely orbited around the genre
orbited
the genre of horror.
Yeah, if you look back at the web quite early on, that was
there's Blake 7 is always, and that's interesting that you bring up the web. It's always had this fear of what we could become or what we could create, like the Decimas or I think Lynx they were called, the ones on Terminal.
Yeah.
And in Moloch, what we could become.
I mean, this episode is definitely a lot more out there in terms of, like you say, the supernatural and the science fiction. It's hard to imagine this. You think back to like the way back, the very first episode, and then you watch this. There is not much of a linking thread there between the episodes. They're basically two completely different shows, and not just in terms of characters, but in terms of tone and themes. And it's definitely gone way more into the realms of sci-fi and fantasy since Blake left as well, I think. But this is one step beyond that, because there's no real rational explanation for why this happens. It's just a mysterious supernatural room. There's no scientific explanation even attempted, is there? It's
just there. It just happens.
I guess I'll just read what I have, because I mean I prepared it, and I don't know. It's not long, but here goes, I guess. And I don't know if this even makes sense, since I was trying to make sense of it as I wrote it. But so this is sort of how I think that this is configured in a more horror-esque way than what Blake 7 has offered before, maybe. I write, we can think of human lives as similar to stories, things that carry on by dying. The ending of a story isn't really the end. It always gives rise to the possibility of new stories. Similarly, life carries on by means of death. Think of things like carrying capacity and also the catharsis of death. How we in some ways yearn for the proximity of death and turn to stories when human death is removed from our lives. John Clute, who's this theorist, talks a lot about how horror is a genre of story, how horror is a genre of story that cannibalizes itself, a story at whose end we get a glimpse of the impossibility of the story to carry on, an anti-story. This is the fourth stage in Clute's configuration of horror, which he calls aftermath, interestingly enough. And the four stages overall are sighting, thickening, revel, and aftermath. In removing from himself the ability to die, Dorian turns himself into the double of the horror he glimpsed, sighted in Clute's configuration, in the room 200 years ago. His death, and therefore his life, which he gave up for immortality, can now only be relocated in the death of the horror in whose mirror he looked. And, man, I don't know, it's interesting that, like, to me, that this guy in some ways gives up his, like, life, you think of like life and like inevitably dying. So like there's, without the possibility of death, there's really like no sense of like, you can't get a sense that something was really alive, right? If there's no possibility of death. So it was interesting to me in this episode, and almost paradoxical how he sort of gives up the ability to die, but in doing so also gives up his life in some way, the ability to pass anything down. I don't know.
Well,
and the implication is that he's become so corrupted as well that he's not just living forever and this thing's aging for him. It's actually this thing's actually absorbing his moral corruption. So it really, it's intriguing to think what Dorian's been up to. And there's that great scene where he gives Avon an interesting look. He says, "You are most welcome here, my friend." And the implication is, I don't know what maybe he's got designs on Avon's body. I don't know, but there's a clear implication that Dorian has been a naughty boy in lots of different respects, and it's quite interesting as well. I think he's quite clearly. I think there's an implication that he is at the very least bisexual, because he's with Sulin. Then he talks about his partner, and I know it could be his business partner, but the implication I think is that it might have been his romantic partner, who then turns out to be quite a young man, right? And that Jeffrey Burridge himself was gay as well, and obviously it's a very full-on performance he gives as well. It's a very dynamic and colourful character. So it's just a shame that he literally bites the dust here, and he turns to dust. Because I think it's a really interesting performance. But I agree with you that I much prefer the salvage guy from the first half, and this I think, imagine the revelation if we'd found out this was who Dorian was maybe 4 episodes in,
right?
And then that could have been interesting.
Yeah, if we'd had this scene, maybe halfway through the season, and I don't think, and then kill him off then maybe, but I still think he's still made a massive impact. I think he's one of the most popular guest characters in Blake 7 of all time.
Well,
he's definitely, I think, the best sort of one-off character ever on Blake 7 so far. I can't think of anyone better off the top of my head or more interesting.
Colin Baker, maybe.
No, not.
If only because his performance was like so over the top. It was kind of hilarious because he blows himself up though at the end, which is.
I mean, Series D has some great guest characters, but Dorian's the best. But there are some really good guest actors coming up.
Yeah, no, I think he was great.
And he makes the start to this season just that much stronger.
Yeah, he really kicks off the season on a good note. And like I said, I really thought right up until he died that he was going to be the one who joined the Liberator crew. Well, actually, right up until the moment he was revealed to be a madman. There's an interesting line from Avon I wanted to bring up. Dorian says something like, I can do anything. And then Avon says, madmen usually can. Which I just thought was interesting because Dorian vehemently denies that he's insane or that he's crazy.
Yeah.
And then Avon kind of just in that one line just kind of tears down his entire argument. Just thought it was interesting. I don't know why, but the madman can do everything kind of idea reminds me a lot of Underwater Menace with I've got all the power in the world. What's his name? What was it? Zaroff. Dying in Atlantis. Was that Underwater Menace?
Yeah, it was.
Anyway, yeah, that's just an aside there that made me think of that. But Dorian dies, and then Sulin
it's Villa who saves the day. Let's just reiterate.
Villa gives Avon the gun to
Villa
kill
the
monster because all the Scorpio guns aren't working, but they still have one from the Liberator. It's just I think it's one. I think it's the gun. I think it's the gun Dana designed, wasn't it?
I thought it was.
No, it's a Federation gun.
Is that a Federation gun?
It would have been great if it had been a Liberator gun, wouldn't it? That would have been the last we ever saw of it. But
yeah. Well,
what do you do?
Yeah.
And then they kind of just Sulin sneaks off, and that's it. We get a weird remix of the title theme.
Yeah. What did you think of that?
I only listened to a piece of it and I turned it off. I was like, no thanks.
It was questionable.
Well, get this. Do you know what the original plan was to have? This was Via Lorimer's idea, and he wrote words to the Blake 7 theme. And the plan, it gets worse. The plan was to have Stephen Pacey singing these lyrics at the end of every episode. And the song, I swear to God, the song was called Distant Star. So it would have been, there's a distant star in a distant sky, past the edge of time, way past Gemini. Peace is there, only beauty meets the eye. Oh my love. I'm going to stop now, but that was it. I've got the lyrics in front of me, by the way. I didn't memorize them.
Can you send those lyrics over via email? I'm going to put them in the show notes.
Email them to you. And it's like, come hit the Stardust Trail. We'll throw our cap at Mars. We'll catch a comet's tail, and we'll sail to the stars.
Wow,
and that
I'm
honestly
speechless.
nearly happened.
I'm speechless. So it reminds me of how Gene Roddenberry wrote lyrics to the Star Trek theme just so he could get the rights to the song, but I don't know if there was ever a serious plan to actually have them in the show.
I keep going on about how I forgive Blake 7 anything. I think that might have been a deal breaker for me.
If the ending credits had come on and there were words in this, I'd just call Kiel like, we're cancelling the podcast. It's done.
Yeah, I wouldn't blame you. I would not blame you.
So, is there any recording of this out there that you can?
No, it never. As far as I know, it never got recorded.
Thank God. You know what? Thank God.
I hope one day it surfaces.
Well, we have a recording now. We have John singing the first verse.
Can you delete that out? That's because I regret that now. I am actually regretting that.
No, I'm gonna move it to the end. I'm gonna move it to the end and use it as our outro sequence.
Oh God, that was the hangover there. I would never do that if I was thinking straight.
Well,
that's insane.
That is the most bizarre thing I've heard on this podcast. And we've heard a couple bizarre things.
Yeah.
Well, now you know, guys. Now you know Blake 7's darkest secret.
Well, I mean, I don't know if we can top that, but I think this is a good time to introduce the new segment. How would this episode be different if it had been written by Terry Nation? Unless you guys have anything else to say about the actual plot of the episode or the meat and potatoes.
I think me singing the lyrics to Distant Star, that's after that where I go. The only way is up from here, isn't it? But I've been thinking about this. Yeah, you said if Terry Nation had written Rescue, it's quite an interesting thought, isn't it? Because Terminal, as you know, was written as the last ever episode of Blake 7, but when he handed in that script, there was a covering note saying, "You'll notice I've actually left the door open if a series 4 ever is needed, if the public demand one." And he actually does. He has Villa rescuing Aurak. When the Liberator blows up, Servalan is in the teleport section.
Right.
And then, Servalan leaves the ship and they've got a base. So he has laid the groundwork for Series 4 there. And Chris Boucher came along and basically just wiped all that out in the first few minutes. But I think if Terry Nation had written this episode, I think we would have maybe seen more of the base and seen the ship that Servalan had left on there, because he left all these pieces on the table when he wrote Terminal. So I think we can assume that he would have done something with those, and I think maybe we would have seen Servalan teleported down from the Liberator. So that's my theory. We would have seen the crew fixing the ship, and then Servalan would have come along at the end and flown off in it, and then I think we would have seen Dorian come down, because he's too good a character not to have in it. And I think perhaps that's what might have happened. I think. I could never imagine Terry Nation introducing a character like Dorian. So maybe Chris Boucher would have written episode 2 and introduced Dorian right at the end of episode 1. And I think, Terry Nation would have done what he does so well, having characters fighting through the jungle and fighting the native life forms. He's done that so many times in Doctor Who and other shows. So I think we would have seen more of that. And I think maybe Callie would have just been killed off between seasons. I think there might have been a fleeting reference to her, maybe getting eaten by a link or something. But I think that's probably what we would have seen.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you on that. I think Callie would have been killed off screen. I don't think we would have gotten anything on screen from her at all.
Yeah, I think
much the same way we see Blake and Jenna kind of disappear in Aftermath.
Sure.
I think definitely if Terry Nation was writing this, he's bringing Servalan back in this very first episode. I think that was just Terry Nation was really fond of these characters he created. He liked bringing them back. So I think we definitely see Servalan come off the ship. I think basically the entire plot of the episode changes. I think I'm with you, John. I don't think actually Dorian even shows up in this episode. I think we potentially get something more contained to the planet Terminal. We have Servalan beamed down. In my mind, we have almost a race to Servalan's ship.
Yes,
in the version I'm envisioning is that Servalan's ship is a Scorpio, and Servalan, the Liberator blows up, Servalan beams down, and we get almost a race between the Liberator crew and Servalan to make it to Servalan's ship before the other team does, because it's the only way off this planet, and the planet's blowing up.
Right.
And then we get a lot of the
Terry Nation. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah,
Terry Nation wandering. The group wandering through the jungle, arguing, trying to fight off the creatures, and then we get Servalan in the background also trying to wander through the jungle. We get some sort of Travis replacement, because I think Servalan would need someone at her side during this journey, and that's kind of how I envisioned this episode playing out if it was written by Terry Nation.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. And maybe Servalan's left there at the end, and then maybe the Federation land and rescue her or something.
Yeah, maybe there's a little scene at the end where we see a Federation cruiser come down to rescue Servalan, or we get some line when they leave on Scorpio like, haha, Servalan's gone for good now. Some ironic line that, Terry would throw in because, Servalan would come back.
And they'd need to find another reason why Dana didn't just kill her, I guess, but...
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds very Terry Nation, doesn't it? Yeah, a countdown, the planet's about to blow up.
Right.
Got to find the spaceship. Yeah, I think that could have been quite good. And you think the spaceship would have just been the Scorpio there ready to go?
Yeah, that's what I imagine. Or, if
but she said it was an old ship, didn't she? She said it's an old ship.
It's an old ship. It's quite slow, but it'll get you off the planet. This is like paraphrased version of what she says.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Terry Nation is a more old school writer than Chris Boucher, definitely, and has always excelled at the things you guys are talking about. And there are all these. Mine, I think, was a little more specific, and we'll have to figure out how we do this as we do it, right?
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of creatures in this episode, right? There are the lynx, and there are those plant snake things, whatever they are. So I said and Terry Nation has always been interested in a lot of this ecological stuff, right? Introducing these creatures, terraforming he's even interested in. You look back at the original Dalek story and they're encountering these metal creatures in this forest, and there's the Thals and the Daleks and how they terraform the planet and use radiation to their advantage. And he's interested in all these inner working systems and almost ecological type things, right? So I said we would have gotten a lot more with the creatures. Maybe some of their background, how they interact in their environment and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that could have played into the whole, if they'd gone for the race to the ship kind of thing. You get a lot of this they're moving through the jungle, they're meeting all these creatures, how this planet works, especially since this planet's man-made. I think Terry Nation could have taken that in a lot of interesting directions.
This sounds like a great episode. I might even adapt it on Twitter. I might bring it to life. Like I've done that with another script that didn't make it. I think you guys write the script and I'll do it on Twitter.
You have to give us a couple weeks. Wouldn't say we're the quickest
John's
writers.
Not coming back for another year
That's
or
true.
two.
We have a
year or two to write this.
Oh yeah, we've got loads of time. Yeah.
We'll be scrambling like the day before. We have nothing.
There's more time than Terry Nation would have written it in.
Yeah.
Well, apparently Thea Lorimer went over to America to see Terry Nation, and they did have a chat about where the series could go. I don't think Terry Nation really had much to say, but they at least made the effort. They approached him, and I think they talked about some vague running themes. But he didn't have any real input at all, and that is why
the exact reason why he didn't come back.
He was out. He was living in the States.
Was it just because he was living in the US at that point?
He was in the US. He was busy doing other stuff. I think he'd shown that. And don't forget, he thought Blake 7 was done and dusted.
That's true.
So, but because of that, Big Finish are doing the Blake 7 stuff. But because Terry Nation didn't write anything for Series D, he didn't create the Scorpio. He didn't create Sulin. That is why there are no Big Finish productions set during Series D, because Terry Nation didn't own that format or those characters. So Big Finish have got the license to do Terry Nation's Blake 7, so they can do any character that he created, which fortunately for them includes all the originals and Dana Tarrant as well. But they can't touch Series D. They would have to do a separate deal for that. And I think that would just be, I think it's too complicated. I think they've tried, but it would be...
I wonder who they'd have to go through. I guess, well, Chris Boucher, would have the rights to Sue Lin and Scorpio, right? Because he wrote this episode?
Yeah, I guess it would be Chris Boucher, and I don't see why he wouldn't give permission, because he's let Star Cops, and I think he's done. I don't know if he's done stuff with Big Finish, but I can't imagine he would refuse. But maybe it's just too complicated. Maybe part of the arrangement with Terry Nation's estate is that they only do Terry Nation's Blake 7.
Possibly the rights are in more legal limbo than we're aware of than just Chris Boucher, right?
Yeah, maybe the BBC own. Yeah. Again, I don't see why the BBC wouldn't give the license. It's a real shame, though, because I think it would be great to see some Series D, hear some Series D audios.
Well, maybe they'll pursue it more proactively once they've wrung A, B, and C for all their work.
Yeah, especially without Gareth Thomas, they're
they're very limited to Series C now, aren't they?
Yeah, because
they had to do that without
past. Yeah,
and they don't have Gisette Simon, but they've recast that part very successfully. But Glynis Barber has said she'd come back, so it's a real shame that they haven't worked it out.
I'm sure they could work something out with the BBC, especially since the BBC's given them the rights to new Doctor Who now, up to the 12th Doctor, which is incredibly recent.
Exactly. I just think it's just very complicated, right?
Yeah, I'm sure there's something, something's in legal limbo somewhere where maybe the rights are split between multiple parties, or they're just in a more complicated place than we know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we created quite a good rescue written by Terry Nation there.
I love it. Yeah, I just love that episode. I want to see it. I want to see this.
And an alternate universe. A universe 5 steps to the left.
Yeah. Let's do it, guys. Let's make this.
Let's make it. Well, I'm still planning out my sitcom-style intro to Blake 7, featuring Avon's smile from the end of Terminal, which I thought was just hilarious. But I think that's a good time to lead us into this email we have from RG, which isn't too long, and we can respond to it here. The subject line is, "Don't read this until you've watched Rescue." And you're going to join us for this response, John, so pay attention since you don't have the text of the email in front of you. In hindsight, I should have forwarded the email to you so you could read it beforehand, but... Hi, Supreme Commanders. I'll try to write my responses to this final season without sulking about the fact that my favorite character is now dead. Rip Callie, you were taking from us too soon. There is some conjecture as to her final word, but it's clear to me that it's Blake. Season 4 has often been referred to as the season where everything goes wrong for Avon. Paul Darrow has said that he chose to play Avon in Series 4 as though he was slowly going insane. We've lost the Liberator and Zen, the cool teleport bracelets, the cool guns, and they all get replaced with, well, you'll see. Lesser versions, probably. Dana and Villa become shadows of their former selves this season. The one bright spark is the addition of Sulin. I think she works as a character in this nice interplay with Dana. Does Avon kiss her? Does Avon kiss anyone this season? Stay tuned to find out. When you're on Ultra World, you run through every corridor. When you're on Dorian's base, you tiptoe down every circular staircase. Those are just the rules. I don't make them up. What a shocker that Dorian is just like Dorian Gray. Who saw that coming, apart from everyone? Welcome to season 4, where we fly over a Ferrero Rocher at the start of every episode. Down and safe and sulky RG.
God, I'll never be able to unsee that.
Every time we watch it now, I see a Ferrero Rocher. I think we hit on all the points in that email in our episode, actually.
Right.
I think we did, yeah. I mean, I'm completely in agreement there. I think it's a real shame that we lost Callie. I was gutted when I saw it at a very young age, and it is a real shame that the character didn't stay around. But then it's very Blake 7, isn't it, that somebody can die just in such a horrible and yet offhand kind of way. And you sort of think if she did stick around, maybe from the scripts I've seen with her in, I don't think she would have had that much to do. So as much as I loved her, yeah, and Sulin is such a great character, and it does make Series 4 stand apart from the rest of the series a little bit more. So don't get me wrong, I would have loved for her to be in it,
right?
But I don't know how much of a difference it would have made. I don't get the impression that they would have lured her back by giving her more to do. I think it would have been the same as the previous seasons, where she would just kind of fade into the background, and that's certainly the case in the scripts I've seen from this season with her in it, with one exception, but I can't really talk about that. Yeah, she had.
Email it to us, and I'll read the email off in that episode.
When you get to it, I will. The episode's called Animals, and Callie would have had it would have been her episode basically, and it could possibly have been the one where she was written out as well.
Interesting.
I'm tempted to come back to talk about animals with you.
I mean, if you'd like.
That's an interesting. No, I can't.
I don't think anyone's claimed animals. I'm going to check our release schedule. So we're doing quite a few crossovers this season, actually. Yeah, no, I think we're doing Sand and Orbit.
I'll let you guys handle that one on your own, but I'll email you about it at the time. Yeah. I think I've sung Distant Star now. I can't.
You can't show your face on the podcast ever again. So we actually we got additionally 2 emails since we recorded this episode with John. We received one from Sergeant Drano, and I'm not kidding about this, literally 2 hours after we finished recording. And we also, since then, have received one from Maurice. So we're going to respond to both of those. Of course, we don't have John to respond to them here with us, but that's okay. We're going to start with the one from Sergeant Drano because it arrived first, I guess. So, and this one should have actually gone in last week's episode because it's about Terminal. But once again, it arrived 2 hours after we finished recording, so we would have recorded a response to that to go into the Terminal episode, but we just finished recording by then. So, hey guys, so Terminal, hell of an episode in my opinion. This episode has an interesting dynamic, especially on first viewing, in that for more than half the episode, the audience and crew are given almost no clues as to why Avon is doing what he's doing. All we can do is try to infer from his actions. Is that what it was like for you guys, or were you spoiled going in? No, I wasn't spoiled. I had no idea what was going on. Situation aboard the Liberator is prickly, with the crew kicked off the bridge by Avon down to amusing themselves with space Monopoly. Avon is being all secretive, and when Tarrant pushes him for answers, Tarrant gets slapped down hard. Avon to Tarrant, nothing and nobody's going to stop it, you least of all. So beautiful. I never get tired of seeing Tarrant get slapped down. Also, Avon's gloves are amazing. When the Liberator flew through those fluid particles, did you ever expect that something so simple as that could spell its end? We get to the egg-shaped artificial planet Terminal. Interesting concept. I really like the pulsing heartbeat noise that is constantly present on Terminal. The voice that activates Avon's directional beacon was interesting. American accent sounds like something out of a 50s sci-fi movie. I wonder if that was anybody famous. Meanwhile, up on the Liberator, the situation is rapidly and literally deteriorating. I like the alarming discrepancy between the auto repair working as hard as it can, Zen claiming the damage is only superficial, and then having to shut down his speech capability. Alarming. Down on Terminal, Avon goes into an underground facility and finds a Liberator teleport bracelet, and computer records tell him Blake is alive. On the Liberator, Villa makes a tough call to shut down the auto repair and focus on investigation and analysis. Callie and Tarrant have a monkey fight. Lol, did you catch how one of the links rebounded off a bush almost like it's a wrestling ring? Avon gets darted, talks briefly to Dreamy Beard Blake, then gets his ass kicked repeatedly by a guard. I think I would have liked this better if they'd been able to sustain the illusion for the audience as well, to make us think that this really was Blake and not a hallucination. What the heck is that sharp thing on Servalan's shoulder? So Servalan finally gets the Liberator and maximum power. Ha 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 ha. I love the way the group turns to leave at the end. Avon lost, and he gives that little smile as he walks off camera. As you guys are probably already aware, this was originally intended to be the final episode of Blake 7, as the creators are all but positive the show is not going to be renewed for a fourth series. What if the series had ended here? How would you guys feel about the story if this turned out to be the end? Of course, it's not the end. We've got one more series to go. The show was renewed at the last possible minute, and consequently, everyone had to scramble around in a panic to figure out what to do for Series D. As a consequence, Series D is a bit of a different feel than the others. There are quite a few fans who bag on Series D as not being that good, but as far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely my favorite season. I'll be interested to see what you think of it, and of course, I'll be interested to see your reaction to the knowledge of just how much Villa weighs. All the best, Sergeant Shane of Station 7 the door. If I remember correctly, we answered a lot of the questions you brought up in the Terminal episode.
Right. As for whether or not we think the show could have ended right there, I'd say yes. Terminal, I think, is the best episode of Blake 7. And that ending with Servalan apparently dying and the Liberator
getting destroyed.
Because that's like, you think back across Series A, B, and C, and like the Liberator is like this. It's the thing, right? It's the thing that's been there the entire time.
Impenetrable, almost.
Even Blake, the main character of the show, the titular character of the show,
is gone,
but the Liberator's still there. So,
and I think it works as a good ending too, because it leaves, like, imagine in your imagination, you can imagine that the story continues, because at the end, the main crew is still alive. Yeah, the Liberator's gone, but they're still alive. And so you can imagine, like, future stories. I prefer that as an ending to a show to something like, Deep Space Nine ends on this, like, really, everybody has, like, a set thing that they do, and they split up the entire crew, and they all go their separate ways, and it's, like, really set in stone what they do and how it ends, right? And there's, like, not really any wiggle room for imagining what happens after that.
You can go the other way and be like, well, they didn't do that, or something like that. I've never watched it.
But I just kind of prefer these endings that, like, feel final, but, like, if you wanted to imagine the story continued, you can, I guess.
Sure.
Just in my opinion.
Yeah, I would have been totally okay, if this had ended Blake 7.
And I think that's something we wanted to return to when we finish Series D as well.
We wanted to for sure compare them when we get to Blake.
Because we wanted to compare them, yeah. So that.
But yeah, thank you
for emailing us yet again, Sergeant Drainer. Nice to hear from you again.
Yeah.
After a little bit of a hiatus, but that's okay.
Looking forward to having you back on the show as well.
We're having him back for Orbit, I believe.
Right.
And then we also have an email from Maurice. Hi, guys. Good discussion about Terminal. Thanks for that. Nice to hear you haven't spoiled yourself to death about Series 4. Try to keep it that way so we get your cold reactions. I'm trying. Regarding Zen's End, I agree with Dylan that it perhaps happens too early in the episode, but I get why the producers might have wanted it to act as a sort of middle of second act, midpoint mind fuck in Hollywood parlance. I'm going to have to beep that out in post. As to Zen's line about failing them, I took it to mean that he realizes that he didn't protect them when he knew better. In the early episodes, they'd sometimes tell him to do something and he just wouldn't, and they'd later realize he was trying to protect them, even if, for whatever reason, he could not tell them why. Zen perhaps got too comfortable by Series 3 and realized it in his final moments, hence his admission of failure.
Yeah, I never thought about that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it, actually. I'm kind of tempted to go back and watch it again now with that in mind. As to which series is the best, I personally feel that sans Blake the show started to list. Avon's terrific, but works better with Blake as a counterpoint. Leonard Nimoy said of Star Trek that he realized after the Galileo 7 that the character of Spock works better when he has Kirk to play off of, and I feel the same about Avon and Blake. I think Tarrant was an ineffective substitute for that dynamic, as such I could never put Series 3 at the top. Servalan's trap would have been more poignant if the information about Blake's whereabouts came from Orax, since he can access all these Teriel cell-based computers, and thus would easily run across any bait Servalan put in a Federation computer. It would have been a great way to show that Orax's amazing capabilities can be double-edged blade that cuts both ways. Final thought, just how does Servalan know what to try to operate the teleport? Were Avon's sticky labels so clear that you could just run up to it and know, do A, B, C, and D? Look forward to hearing your reactions to Series 4. Maurice. In regards to Servalan, I think Servalan's watched them teleport her off the Liberator before, because the episode where she was on the bridge with Dana and she was like, you have to kill me right now here if you want to kill me. I think she probably watched them teleport her off the Liberator in that episode.
Yeah, she's resourceful. She can maybe discern from just one viewing. And if not, big finish.
Although, as we find out, they're not allowed to do anything from Series D, apparently.
Yeah.
In regards to Avon and Blake working better together, I don't know if I wholly agree with that. Blake, I think, felt almost like a restraint on Avon, reining him in almost. Whereas unhinged Avon is unlimited Avon. Much like Gan had a limiter in his head.
Blake was Avon's limiter. This is going to be something really interesting that we can keep thinking about in Series D when we supposedly get a more unhinged Avon.
Right, because as John mentioned, Avon apparently gets even more unhinged throughout Series D.
Right.
Although I do agree that Spock works a lot better with Kirk as a counterpoint. I agree with that point, at least in my opinion, having watched the movies. But a lot of really good points there, I think, from Maurice as well, that I kind of agree with. I don't know about the Zen thing getting too comfortable, or if it's just so much as them just forgetting what they were initially doing with Zen, being all mysterious and controlling.
No, I think that's a really I never thought about that.
I think it's an interesting perspective on the event, because I think we looked at it so much as
him
Zen,
developing a personality, or revealing that he has that, maybe revealing over the course of these 3 seasons that he has developed a personality and he hasn't really showed it. But yeah, that's for sure interesting.
Yeah. So thank you,
thanks.
Maurice.
Thanks again.
Maurice, if you want to be on the show, all you got to do is email us. We're coming to the end here.
We got a few weeks left.
A few weeks left, so. And we are open to pretty much
anyone being on
the show, yeah.
Any episode.
Well, except the ones that have been claimed already.
Yeah.
So, now we're going to return to our original ending that we recorded with John, because once again, these 2 emails we received after we finished recording with John, so we weren't able to have John respond to them with us, but we wanted to respond to them anyway. So thank you, both of you, Maurice and Drano, for emailing us. And
here's us a week ago, and John.
Back to us from a week ago. Oh, boy. Well, thank you, John. I think that about wraps up the episode, unless you have some final closing thoughts.
I don't think so. Again, sorry, I've talked at great length. That's been over 2 hours, hasn't it?
Yeah, but, I think it's a good episode, and that's the fun thing about these crossovers is that, they end up being really long, but they're all really interesting, I think.
And definitely more insight than we would have ever even approached alone.
Right.
Well, thanks for getting me back on. So, as I say, it is my favorite episode, and I think there is just so much to unpack in it, and it's, the start of I think, the best series of Blake 7, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you make of the rest of it. So, my advice is keep an eye on Paul Darrow and stick with Sulin, because she gets a lot better as the episodes go by, and just enjoy it.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it, and I really appreciate you being on the show again.
Yeah, definitely.
Coming back, joining this menagerie again.
No, I love it. I love coming on. I think you guys are great. I listen to your podcast every week. I think I really enjoy it. And I think you just strike that right balance between, pointing out the errors and the flaws when they're there, but always trying to find something positive and just hearing a fresh perspective on it, because I think you are coming at it from the first time, and uncovering stuff that I've never thought about before. So, keep up the good work.
Thank you. Only 12 episodes after this, or 13 actually. 13 because we're doing the 40th anniversary audio as well.
Oh, great. Oh, you should do all the big finish, and then you can do the annual stories.
We might take a break first, I think. We kind of run ourselves ragged doing 2 weekly podcasts and a monthly podcast, so we might take a couple months off.
Have you ever watched Space 1999? You should do that next.
My dad suggested that, actually, right before we started this podcast. He's like, oh, you should watch Space 1999. I'm like, okay, I'll put it on the list.
Oh, yeah. Do that. And then I'll come back and talk about that as well.
Okay. We do have a list of other shows we're considering.
And a list of things people have recommended to us.
Yeah, I think the list has got Sapphire and Steel.
That was my recommendation.
The Prisoner.
That's the one I'm not going to do.
Twilight Zone. things like that. So.
King of the Hill. Still holding
that's
out
your
the
suggestion,
King of
which
the Hill
I
podcast.
consistently deny still. Thank you, John.
I love
Thank
that show.
you, John. Oh boy.
But yeah, it's not in the realm of like anything we've ever done before, so
Yeah, and we'll keep it that way. Anyway,
I'll just start my own.
Yeah, start your own podcast.
One man King of the Hill podcast.
If there's anyone out there who would like to email us with suggestions for other podcasts, or just love letters, angry rants, your thoughts on this episode, you can reach us at thedoctor@decorativevegetable.com. You can find us on YouTube at Decorative Vegetable. Unsurprisingly, you can find us on Apple Podcasts and Google Play at Zenith, a Blake's 7 podcast. Be sure to leave a rating if you like the show. Recommend us to your friends as we slowly grind to a halt at the end.
It's on Facebook. Trust your doctor. Like us on Facebook. Also check us out on Twitter at TYD Podcast and follow us on Twitter. And next time we're watching Power. And do you want to just plug yourself again, John?
I think I've already plugged myself to death. I have nothing more to add to that. I will say that Power is possibly it's not my second favorite episode, but it's brilliant too.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the season. And one more time, thank you for being on the show, John.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Until then.
Until next time.
The end.